Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome, all of you, to our international symposium. I'm Koichi Hasegawa, the host of this event, the leader of Compon Japan team, and a professor of Shokei Gakuin University, Miyagi, Japan. Last night, our area, Sendai, Miyagi, got a very strong earthquake. Fortunately, I have no trouble. Thank you for your concerning. I'm very happy to have time to talk to you today. Now, about 24 scholars and researchers are joining this online symposium from India, Japan, and other countries. Thank you very much for your participation and for taking time out of your very busy schedule to join this event. This event will provide the output of the collaborative research from 2019 by Compon Japan and Compon India, the Climate and Energy Policy Research Laboratory led by Dr. Pradip SWARNAKER, Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. December 2019, a Japan team visited Kanpur and exchanged both idea and findings. And we were really enjoying very nice, delicious Indian food, etc. Thank you very much. Originally, we had a plan to invite the Indian team to Japan. But unfortunately, due to the COVID-19, finally, we abandoned holding the physical symposium and changed to the online format. But I'm very happy to find that much more audience from all over the world can participate this online event. Via Zoom, we are realizing we are connecting each other at your campus, in your office, or your home. Let us talk together, listen together, and exchange our idea together. Together is also one of our sharing values today, as well as sustainability. In this project, we are focusing on the policy network related to climate change and energy transition in both countries. Compon means comparing climate change policy networks, global research networks, which research teams of about 20 countries are joining. This project was advocated by Jeffrey Broadbent, Professor Emeritus at the University of Minnesota. I believe the Indian team is one of the most active and most energetic research teams of Compon networks. India is the world's third largest emitter of GHG, greenhouse gas, with the second largest population of 1.38 billion. India will have the largest population beyond China within next several years. Japan is the fifth largest emitter of GHG, following China, the US, India, and Russia. Both are regarded as major key players in decreasing GHG because They are strongly dependent on coal-fired power plants. This symposium will provide updated information and discussions about the current status and challenges of climate and energy policy, which both countries are facing. We have some similarities and many differences. How different and how similar? This is very critical point. Today, we have 5 presentations. I believe all of them will be very stimulating. Each presentation has 20 minutes talks and another 20 minutes for Q&A. So we have plenty of time for Q&A and discussions. Beyond COVID-19, beyond the war in Ukraine, and beyond this very tough situation, let us go forward to more peaceful and more sustainable future. Now is the time to start this program, and let us think about and talk together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hasegawa. Now, let's begin our session. The first presenter is Dr. Masako Konishi from WWF Japan and Showa Women's University. The title of her talk is Current Status and Challenges of Japan's Climate and Energy Policy. Dr. Konishi, please.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. As Dr. Hirano has introduced, my name is Masako Konishi. I've been working for WWF Japan since 2005, and I've been attending the COP already 16 times. And also I'm starting to teach at university since 2017. So based on my past experience with COPs, I'm going to talk about the current status and challenges of Japan's climate and energy policy. So let me share my screen first. Here. So let me begin the story how Japan's greenhouse gas emissions rose and then declined. So trend of GHG emissions in Japan and its implications. As you can see here, since 1990, which Japan was supposed to reduce in the Kyoto Protocol, Japan couldn't decline its GHG emission, especially this green line is CO2. You can see the CO2 constantly rising up. And if you compare it with the expansion of coal power plants, it just is the same trend. So basically, Japan's CO2 emission rose due to the expansion of coal power plants. So this was the past since 1990 until 2007. And then we see in 2008 financial crisis, and it dropped, but rapidly increasing again. And then there was a Fukushima nuclear accident. So before the Fukushima nuclear accident, Japanese electricity, 30% came from nuclear. And in order to fill in the loss of the nuclear power plants, the utility started to burn more coal and gas. So due to that, again, it rose so much. But here in 2012, first time in Japan, feed-in tariff for promoting renewable energy was put in place. Now the renewable energy really picked up its increase, and also the energy saving really expanded. So due to energy saving and renewable energy share, it now is going steadily down. So we see the downtrend here. So what we can see from the past of the emission trend is that Japanese emission rose and declined, it not because of the policy, but external factors. But since the Fukushima nuclear accident, thanks to feed-in tariff, the policy to expand the renewable energy is now taking effect. So that is the past trend. And Japanese energy plan for 2030 issued by METI is still nuclear 20 to 22%. And as you can see, Japan's nuclear energy is less than now 3%. And it's very, very unrealistic. In 8 years' time, we could have 20 to 22%. But Japanese government is not yet starting to discuss this issue. So most likely, we would fail to have nuclear power plants in the order of 20 to 22%. And still, we are maintaining coal power plants 19%. Currently, is around 30%. So government says it's going to drop, but still, Japanese is going to maintain the coal power plants. We have already implemented the policy, phase out the inefficient coal power plants, but it means that we will still maintain what they call efficient coal power plants. And we all know, even if the coal power plants as efficient as possible, it still emits twice compared to gas. So this is really a problem of Japan that cannot still decide to phase out coal power plants. And renewable energy, currently around 20%. It's not ambitious, unfortunately. We will have 36 to 38% by 2030. So as you can see, LNG is playing a bigger role as transition energy. And as Japan is importing almost 100% fossil fuel from abroad, there is always an energy security issue, which we are currently also experiencing due to Ukraine problem. So the problem here is that Japan has not yet made its mind about how to deal with nuclear power plants and coal power plants. And that is one of the challenges that the Japanese, not only energy, but also climate policy faces. So there are two big questions for Japan. Decarbonizing Japan. First one is coal power plant question. As you know, Japan has been criticized for building new coal power plants domestically and exporting coal power plants. And still 8 new plants are in pipeline. In total, 181 coal power plants are operating in Japan. So there is a strong risk of becoming these new coal power plants as stranded assets in the coming future, if and when the policy, climate policy, would be in place. So how to deal with coal power plants is what Japan really needs to think about. And also at COP26, we all know that at the COP26 decision, it is written down, phase down coal power plants. And it's the first time in COP decision to mention about a specific energy, which is very unusual because usually this international agreement do not touch upon the domestic policy itself. But for the first time in COP decision, it mentioned about coal. So this shows that how the international society is thinking about the coal as the main source of accelerating climate change. So I think India and Japan really needs to think about how to deal with coal. And as we all know, first it was coal phase out, but then it was toned down to coal phase down due to a fierce resistance of emerging economies. And Prime Minister Kishida, Japan raised its 2030 target from the previous 26% to 46% in last year, which is really a drastic change. And also Japan commits net zero by 2050. So now from the outset, Japan's climate policy is in line with the other developed countries. And also Prime Minister Kishida commit a new finance commitment of $10 billion in the coming 5 years. So which could be evaluated as good action from Japan, but still Japan got a fossil award, which as you, I think, know, which will be given to the laggard of the climate policy. The reason here is because Prime Minister Kishida mentioned about existing thermal power plants generations into zero emission power generation is a necessary path. So basically meaning that Japan will keep thermal power plants and to transform fossil fuel fired thermal power into zero emission thermal power, such as ammonia and hydrogen. So what's the problem of ammonia and hydrogen? So this is a fossil award from Climate Action Network, which is 600 climate NGOs all around the world gave fossil fuel, saying that Kishida has deluded dreams of using ammonia and hydrogen as zero emission thermal power. But these novice and costly technologies are linked to fossil fuel extraction and would leave little chance of meeting the global 1.5 degrees targets. So basically, ammonia, as you may know, it's a combination hydrogen and nitro. So even if you combine it and then bring it to Japan, make it in Australia, made from fossil fuel without using any CCS, and bring it by ship to Japan and burn it only 20% in that thermal power, it doesn't actually reduce its emission out of coal power plants. So that was the reason why this ammonia and hydrogen was regarded as not an option for reducing the coal power plants. And please do not take me wrong, hydrogen is very much needed in the coming years in order to substitute for fuel-based CO2 or heat-based CO2. But using hydrogen for 2030 is not yet commercialized. So it's not in line with 1.5 degrees target. That was the reason why Japan was criticized at COP26 again. And the second question is still Japan has not yet implemented any effective carbon pricing yet. As we all know, carbon pricing is a powerful means to accelerate energy saving, but Japan does not have a definite policy for promoting energy saving yet due to a fierce resistance of the Japanese Industry Association. So meaning that there is no explicit carbon price domestically in Japan yet. And still main climate measures for the industry depends on industry voluntary plan. And now Japan is now thinking about creating a new kind of carbon pricing scheme, which is called GX League, Green Transformation League, but still it's again voluntary action. So basically Japanese climate policy for industry is always depending on voluntary action. And also we do have carbon tax, which is just €2, just maybe $2 per ton, which is very, very low. So it doesn't have effect on and as an incentive for reducing CO2 in Japan. So how to deal with carbon pricing in Japan is also the second big issue. And now, as we all know, there will be a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is now being implemented in EU since 2023. It will be a big pressure for not only Japan, but for the other economies too. But I think this can be a kind of good incentive for Japan to implement a definite carbon pricing. So anyway, Japan still has a lot to do. But anyway, at least it already pledged 46% reduction by 2030, which Japan needs to achieve. So hopefully these powerful policies will be implemented in place in the near future. And last but not least, let me introduce our energy scenario. WWF is creating energy scenario along with a research group since 2011, since Fukushima nuclear accident. We have issued already 3 times energy scenario, how to decarbonize Japan by 2050. So 100% renewable energy. And we have calculated again last year how to achieve Japanese 46% reduction by 2030. And when we accelerate that renewable energy share around by 50%, which is very much practical, and nuclear 2% and LNG around 40%, then we can phase out coal power plants by 2030. Also, we need energy saving around 20%, but which is in line with the government's new plan, so it's okay. And we can phase out coal. And when we achieve that, then we can reduce our GHG emission by half. So it's possible based on the scenario that we calculated. So it's up to us, Japanese, to decide which future path we would like to choose. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer whatever questions you may have. And also, I would very much want to hear your comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Konishi. Now I would like to welcome questions and comment from the floor. If you wish to speak up, please send us the chat that noting that you have questions. You don't necessarily have to spell out your question per se. You just say, I have a question, right? Anybody, please?
Yeah, okay.
Please. Pradip, please.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Masako. It's a very wonderful presentation, and we clearly understand that how Japan is going to reduce its fossil fuel dependence and what is the future pathways. But as researching on just transition for some time, so can you little bit elaborate, because you are an important civil society organizations closely working with the government. So the people who are going to lose the job because of, closing down those not so efficient power plants. So how the government or the civil society organizations or the community is going to cope up with this closing down of power plants. So if you can tell a little bit about that.
Thank you very much. It's a very, very valid question. So how to do that just transition is also a very big issue in Japan. And why the power company wants to maintain the coal power plants, one big reason is because it's not yet, they haven't collected the investment yet. But as we see into the details of the coal power plants, 80% of the coal power plants that are operating in Japan right now is now old. So more than 30 years old. So when it becomes in 2030, they are, most of 80% of them are very old. So the question is, anyway, they are going to close down. So the remaining 20%, and still Japanese are trying to build a new power plants, that will be the question. And as you see, there is employment, and also how to substitute these power plants is a big issue in Japan, especially because in Japan, the employment policy is very, very rigid. So it's very difficult for Japanese company to fire people, and also needs to have a new industry for them to be able to work, that is a big question. But I do believe that there are a lot of ways to do so. So if there is any abrupt policy change, it will be a big damage. But if the company itself know that we need to phase down coal power plants by 2035 or 2000 something, then companies can prepare for that. So they can train their employees and they can substitute their power plants such as LNG or renewable energy, or even try to get into the sector coupling. For example, the electricity company can also go into the EV company. So there are a lot of future opportunities. So I think what we really need is a policy signal. Maybe some kind of a carbon pricing is the best, because if the tax will be like $50 by 2030 and $100 by 2035, companies can decide which path Japan is going ahead. So that purpose, then companies can at least prepare for that. So I think if even for the companies themselves, for the just transition perspective, it's better that we do have a definite policy signal coming from the government.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pradip. I think Professor Hasegawa has a question. Professor Hasegawa?
Yeah. Thank you, Masako. I agree the importance of carbon price system. I calculate the case of Sendai power station. It's a coal-fired power plant in my area. And I found if the carbon price system 4,000 M, maybe it $35 US per ton is introduced. I calculate how the price of electricity of producing electricity cost up. So I found now 9.3 N. If the carbon price system $35 US per ton, this price increase about 3.91 N. So totally 13.2 N electricity producing electricity price. Yeah. So I just realized introducing carbon pricing system is most effective way to stop coal-fired plant. And in my best knowledge, a Japanese Ministry of Environment has want to introduce such carbon price system, but Ministry of Economy and Trade and Keiichi industrial sector declining to introduce. Yeah. So do you have some idea to going forward to introducing a carbon pricing system in Japan?
Thank you. That is a very, very difficult question because, we've been discussing about how to implement carbon pricing already more than 15 years, I think. But the government committee about carbon pricing, as you know, it's divided into two parts. One belongs to Minister of Environment and one belongs to Minister of Industry and Economy. I'm a member of the Minister of Environment one, but it's going separate, and it's so hard to cross the road. And usually Ministry of Economy and Industry is more powerful in Japan when talking about the policy for industry. And I've been trying very hard how to move it forward with my colleagues. So we had made a policy proposal with the researchers group from Kyoto University. But just having policy proposal does not move us ahead. So now, as you know, Minister of Economy and Industry is launching a new, what they call carbon pricing scheme, which is called Green Transformation League, GX League. And I was reading it this morning because I need to make a presentation on that next week. And then I found out it's really just a voluntary scheme that if your company is willing to participate, then you can participate in an emission trading scheme. And then if you are willing to have your target, you can have it. And if you are willing to meet your target, you can meet your target. But even if you don't meet your target, you are not being punished. So is this really an emission trading scheme? Is really a question. So now, as Minister of Environment and Economy always is a leader of initiating this policy proposal, maybe there are two ways. One is that you at least endorse this new voluntary emission trading scheme and then try to change it into more compulsory one, or you just say it's not enough. We need carbon pricing and maybe expect external international pressure from the other parts of the world, because there are already a lot of carbon pricing scheme in around the world, even in China. I'm thinking about it. And I'm pretty sure if India is going to start carbon pricing, especially a strong emission trading scheme, it will also pressure Japan a lot. So unfortunately, we always count on international pressure, I think.
Thank you very much. Yes, we need external pressures. Okay. Anjali, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Would you like to? Yeah, please.
Thank you, Keiko. Thank you, everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Anjali. I'm a second-year PhD scholar here at Climate and Energy Policy Research Lab. My research domain is the water pollution in the Ganges River along the themes of public understanding of science, pluralistic ignorance on the environmental issues, and so on. Thank you, Masako, for this very wonderful presentation. I have a question and one observation is that Japan presents an interesting example of how you can kind of increase your coal-based CO2 emission without actually having any coal mines in your own country. So that's a kind of ironical in the case of Japan. So it's like Japan is kind of importing its entire coal-based CO2 emission, and that too in an era when most of the advanced and the developed economies are actually kind of exporting their CO2 emissions to other countries. So it is a bit of kind of weird. But we also had one talk from Greg at our Just Transition talk series somewhere in November last year. There also he kind of explained about the complex domestic economic and the social rationale for kind of running the coal mines due to the reasons of employment and everything. So in such a scenario, when there is so much of entanglement between what the policymakers should go about it, how the lobbying industries which support the pro-coal industries are going about it. So in such scenario, like what do you see as what is the feasible pathway for the Japan to go about the transition? Like we are not even talking about the just transition, like at least for the transition pathway to the renewables. So what's your idea? Like Japan cannot go back to its nuclear again because of the social issues that it has kind of generated. It has become kind of unpopular. So in such scenarios, what are the options that Japan has to go for the transition to the renewables? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was not sure if I could understood your second question well enough, so I may need to ask you again. So you are basically asking me about Japan is importing 100% fossil fuel from abroad, and why still depend on coal is your first question. And
yes, that's
yeah.
my first question. And then the second question is a follow-up, that in such scenario, when you don't see a lot of kind of advocacy for the renewables itself from the grounds, from the people, from the policymakers. So in such scenario, what is the feasible pathway for the Japan to kind of transit into the renewables?
Okay, I see. Okay, thank you. So for your first question, yes, you are absolutely right. Japan is importing 100% fossil fuel from abroad, but Japan has a history of oil shock in 1980, when Japan was very much relying on oil. There was a shock. So since then, Japan really made effort to increase its energy efficiency. At the same time, from what they say, energy security point of view, they switched importing coal more, because coal is being produced most of the part of the world, meaning that if Japan has some issue with some country, Japan can switch into another country to import. So because Japan is importing 100% fossil fuel from abroad, Japan inclined into coal, which is more, not only cheap, but also being produced most of the part of the world. So that is one of the reasons why Japan really dependent on coal. And the second question, why still Japan does not go into more renewable energy? I think there are a lot of past and kind of, lessons that we need to learn from the past. But one big issue is because Japanese power companies is very much dominated by 9 big power companies, and they dominate all 3 parts. So generation and distribution and wholesale. These 3 parts are all dominated by one power company, and there are 9 power companies who are doing in their area their own business. So from that point of view, once they build a new thermal power plants or nuclear power plants, they want to make as much as possible to make profit out of it, because they invested a lot. So renewable energy is more like distributed energy that could be joined by a lot of other companies. So they wanted to exclude it as much as possible. So that is one of the reasons why Japan suppressed renewable energy share. But it all changed in the nuclear power plants. So Fukushima nuclear accident really changed the situation. Now Japan, for the first time, realized that from the energy security point of view, we need to increase our domestic energy, which could be also renewable energy. So when the feed-in tariff, the policy was in place, a lot of players just poured into the Japanese market, and now renewable energy finally took off. But still, as you can see, we are infant stage. So it's only 10 years. So compared to Europe or some parts of the United States, where they already promoted renewable energy for the last 30 years, we are still at the very early stage that still renewable energy share is only 20%, and we cannot increase in one overnight. So that is why we still need to depend on fossil fuel. So we are now in the transition time that is going to which direction. So as you see, if Japan decides, okay, we increase renewable energy more, so we put more policy incentive, we put more carbon pricing, then we can go to renewable energy world. But if not, still there are really a lot of group who wants to maintain thermal power plants. So we are really on the verge of which direction we are going. I hope I'm answering your question.
Yes, that answered a lot of it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I have a posting from Gregory. Would you like to ask a question?
Sure, yes, thank you. A very fascinating presentation. My question is about the carbon tax that Japan already has. So yes, €2, 290 yen per ton of CO2. How does this work? Because yes, I guess, yeah, how does it work? And like, how is this money treated? Because this still creates like, I guess, a pool of, carbon money. So how does the government use this money? Is it used to support, low carbon innovation? Yes, and how does this system work, please? So for example, what type of activity in industry has to pay for this tax? Thank you. And who is targeted?
Okay, thank you. So carbon tax 289 is very low, but it was initiated by Minister of Environment. So there is a political dynamics where how much Minister of Environment can do is very much limited, that they wanted to promote carbon tax and then they managed to put it in, but they couldn't make it bigger carbon tax. But they at least initiated to have the first carbon price in Japan, and the tax revenue is going to, I think, global warming measures. I need to ask Dr. Hasegawa on that, how much Japan's carbon tax revenue is being used. But in my understanding, it's moktekize, so it's more flowing into these global warming counter measures. And although its revenue is small, it is working well. So it saves energy. It also promotes the counter global warming measures. So it's a good thing. And now Minister of Environment really wants to raise it. And the problem of this carbon tax in Japan is because it's so small, it is not comparable to CO2 emission. So there are like other energy taxes in place, the existing energy tax in places. And when you compare, for example, for power plants, which energy you want to use, coal or gas, still, because carbon tax is so small, the tax itself in total is not higher for coal compared to gas. So from that point of view, it's not incentivizing to reduce carbon. So maybe you cannot call it carbon tax. That is the reality of Japan. And Dr. Hasegawa, can you please help me about the revenue of the carbon tax in Japan?
Professor Hasegawa?
We can't hear you. It's muted.
Professor Hasegawa, can you demute yourself?
Oh. Yeah. I have no data on tax revenue. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I Googled it now, and then the revenue that is coming out of this global warming tax, which is basically carbon tax, is also, is used for energy saving and renewable energy acceleration and greening the fossil fuel power plants. Yeah, so it's moktekize.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Hello.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I have a question. Here, you were talking about the carbon taxes, but whether is there any better provision or better result if we can go for some payments for these ecosystem services in terms of carbon emission reduction? So, which will can we do better? Can you please answer my question? Let me know.
If I understood you correctly, are you asking, is there any other measures
Yeah.
than carbon tax?
Besides the tax, we can go for some payments or subsidies for the stakeholders who will reduce the carbon emissions without imposing taxes on them. So, because sometimes people move towards the rewards and payments, so will it be useful in reducing the carbon and the greenhouse gas emissions? So, what is your opinion about it?
Yeah, I hope I understood you correctly. There are a lot of other measures to reduce carbons, and
Okay.
I do believe that we need a policy package. So we need whole parts of the policy package, and carbon pricing is just one of the major policy here. And I was explaining because it's really a pity for Japan that we don't have the major policy here in place. But of course, there are lots of other policies itself. And also there are kind of energy saving policy measures and also transparency measures. So how much you emit, how do you do your plan? So these kind of transparency policies. And also there are lots of building code energy and fuel policy, and also for the public to change their behavior, there must be also like a public awareness campaign too. So there are lots of other policy measures, and Japan is in favor of more like campaign or awareness raising campaign or voluntary action, and not very effective policies. So that is the problem of Japan. But of course, there are huge policy package needed from all perspective.
So is there any rewarding policies for the stakeholders who reduce the carbon emissions?
You mean driving for cars?
Rewarding policies. They can be rewarded if they cut the emissions.
Sorry, can anybody help me?
Rewarding.
Rewarding.
Yeah,
Okay.
policy, yeah.
Rewarding policy. You mean so people who do take action will be rewarded by policy? Is that what you mean? Okay, thank you.
You're right.
Sorry that I couldn't understand you correctly. Yes, rewarding policy. So I think carbon pricing is one of the very strong measures that rewards the companies who is taking strong action. And it's very fair because then companies who are doing strong policy will be rewarded by, less carbon tax, and also got some kind of a subsidies that came out of the tax revenue. And then companies who are not taking action will be kind of punished by paying a lot of carbon tax. So a rewarding system is very much needed for people to take action. So from that point of view, I think most of the policy is considering this kind of a rewarding package too, in the forms of subsidies from the government or some kind of a entry policy. So if you do this and this, then you are allowed to getting this scheme kind of a thing is also one of the rewards. So every policy is, I think, is packaged with these kind of rewards.
Yeah, that was my question. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Well, just because the time is up, I think we need to go on with the next presentation. Dr. KONISHI, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, the next presenter is Keiichi Sato from Hitotsubashi University. This talk is titled Comparative Analysis of the Policy Network in Japan and India. Professor Sato, please.
Okay, so sorry, it took a while. Can you hear me? Okay, so hello everyone, good afternoon. My name is Keiichi Sato. I'd like to talk about with this presentation about the policy network constellation in Japan and India. And this is a collaborative work with our Compon Indian team, Pradip, SWARNAKER, and Avinash Kuma, and the Compon Japanese team, Gregory Quencher, and me. So let us start with the basic questions. What makes the climate policy? Actually, it is not easy to answer in a single word. In standard political science literature, we often differentiate public opinion, politics, and policy networks. And to capture what each term means, it may be a good idea to make an analogy with billiards. So your goal is to drop the balls in the hole, which is the analogy of the policy output. So how to do this? First off, you need an energy to hit, which is a public opinion here. And the energy will be transmitted through the stick, which is the politics. And the direction of the sticks decides what holes you aim at. But it is not the end. There are several balls around you, and if you hit the balls rightly, then you can put many balls into a hole. But if you do wrong, and all the balls go in the wrong direction. So in other words, what the important point is, the concentration of the balls really matters for the final output. So what we focus in this presentation is a concentration of the balls, namely the policy networks. Our analysis will show you that the concentration of the policy networks in India and Japan is very different, and which in turn a very important factor to understand the policy process in both countries. So what is a policy network? Policy networks are a relatively stable set of networks between public and private actors. Networks are multiple relationships such as information sharing, collaboration, mutual trust, and authority recognition. The important point is that such networks are not endlessly open to everyone, because contemporary policy such as climate policy requires a high degree of expertise. Only a limited number of actors can be a stable member of this network. For example, in the case of Japan, WWF may be an important player of this policy networks. In addition to it, other actors such as Ministry of Environment or Japan Business Federation, namely Keiichi, and so on. Then you might ask, wait a minute, how can WWF and Japan Business Federation can be a collaborative partner? Their view on climate policy is so different. Yes, and this is a point. While there may be a stable exchange about the information, some relationship might be more favorable, whereas some relationship can be more conflictual. And the second concept, advocacy coalition framework, captures this aspect of coalition politics. It assumes that in most of the policy domains, there are always several clusters of actors who collaborated each other, and the policy dispute occurs between these coalitions of actors, which is called advocacy coalitions. So, so we support that there's a difference in the advocacy coalition constellation in Japan and India. and it reflects the contextual difference between the developed and developing countries. We have good reason to believe so. What is your image of developing countries, especially emerging economies such as India, China, Brazil, and South Africa? Some of you might answer that they are not that proactive towards the climate policy. These countries also stresses the historical responsibility of the developed countries and prioritize the development over the mitigation policy. While the such common but differentiated responsibility and right to growth is still the important principle for these emerging economies, their ongoing action, especially since around 2010, is quite different from the past. These countries plays quite proactively in international negotiation and actively implement the climate policy, especially installation of renewables. To take an example, in 2015, Indian government set a goal of achieving 175 gigawatt renewables by 2022, and recently they upgraded the target to 227 gigawatts by 2027. So this is actually the strong contrast in developed countries. In developed countries, the necessity of energy transition is widely acknowledged, but there are always back and forth in the actual policy, not only in Japan, but also in other countries, such as even UK and Germany. We acknowledge this is a very super simplified picture, and there are so many important details in actual policy process. For example, dependence in coal is a very serious problem in India, and Japan is quite fast actually in the growth of the renewables after the Fukushima accident. But still, even taking such details into account, we think that the basic notion is still valid, namely the dynamics of the climate policy process in developing countries are changing, and that is apparently different from what we know in developed countries. So what is the factor behind this change in developing countries? From the literature, we can summarize the following three macro factors behind this change. First, it is the Paris Agreement that paved a way for the change. While under the Kyoto Protocol, the developed countries were responsible to mitigate the greenhouse gas. But under the Paris Agreement, every member country is required to submit their domestically determined mitigation and adaptation plan. And hence, domestic policy, climate policy has becoming increasingly important for developing countries too. Second, developing countries are also confronted with an urgent need to take aggressive countermeasures against degrading environmental conditions, which was caused by rapid industrialization and urbanization. And in parallel, citizens are becoming increasingly aware of their vulnerability to climate change, and the pressure for the policymakers are increasingly high now in the developing countries. Third, climate policy in developing countries is tightly coupled with energy policy. Because of the rapid growth, the demand for the electricity is increasing dramatically, and therefore there's a need to expand the energy supply regardless its source. And we can translate these different contexts in developed and developing countries into the concept of the game in domestic energy market. In India, it is a non-zero-sum game. Once again, energy consumption in India is increased dramatically. Namely, annually, it increased by 5.2% between 1990 and 2016. And it is still forecasted that it will grow annually by 4.2% until 2040. In this situation, the increase in renewables are compatible with the other energy sources. It makes a strong contrast in Japan, where it can be seen it is a zero-sum game. The energy consumption is increased annually only 0.4% on average between 1990 to 2010. Moreover, since 2011, energy consumption declined annually 1.2%. In such circumstances, increases in renewables immediately implies the loss of share in other energy sources. So far, what we have seen is that we have seen the difference in the macro contextual factors in India and Japan. So what we don't know yet is how such macro factors affect the constellation of policy networks and how policy networks in turn influences the macro factors. And this is common structure. It's a really common structure and agency problem in social sciences. The context, namely the structure, may partially determine the actions of the actors, but not completely. And there's still many rooms for actors to choose their actions, and their choice of the action determines partially, once again, the future shape of the structure. So to put more concise, our research question here is, how have these different games reflected the contrasting circumstances of developing and developed countries influenced the constellation of the advocacy coalitions and their respective policy preferences? Hypothetically, there are two possible basic constellations here. Suppose we have two advocacy coalitions here, and we have two climate policy issues. That is the expansion of renewables and nuclear energy. In the first constellation left, advocacy coalition 1 is supporting the renewables and opposing the renewable nuclear energy. The advocacy coalition 2 takes the opposite stance. They support nuclear energy and opposes renewables. In such constellation, conflict over the choice of energy source occurs between advocacy coalition and 2. In other words, there is a cleavage between coalition on the energy source. In this constellation, we can expect that in one period of policy cycle, one side of a coalition would win and put their preferred policy option forward, but the loser coalition would try to win the next round of the policy process. Consequently, policy progress always goes in back and forth. In the second constellation on the right, the coalition 1 supports the renewables, but they have no opinion toward nukes. The coalition 2 supports the nukes, but they don't oppose renewables. In this constellation, we can expect that both renewables and nukes will take a progress. This is obviously a really highly simplified and hypothetical model, and the empirical data is more complicated. But this illustration maybe help you to understand the result from the next slide. So now we turn to the actual data. So we used the compound survey in which we collected the answers from the main influential organizations that are involved in the domestic climate change policy making in both countries. The organizations were identified by counting the number of appearances in newspaper articles about the climate policy, as well as the number of the listed as a member of the advisory council. We also cross-checked to some experts in climate politics if the list includes all core actors. The data were collected in 2012 and 2013 in Japan and 2014 in India. We asked respondent organizations about their opinions toward climate policy. We also asked them to answer which other organizations they collaborated with. There are several limitations with this data. And first of all, the data is getting old now. And so the Indian team has now already collected a new data, and the Japan team is planning to do so also in the coming days. In terms of the response rate with the current data, both countries have gathered a low response rate from the government and the political actors. In addition, Japanese data has a low response rate from businesses. So for these sectors, it can be the case that we miss some important actors. Indian data contains many NGO sectors, so be aware when reading the results in the following slides. So let's start with looking at the opinions of the main organizations in both countries. We can read 3 points from this table. First, no statistical difference were found for basic beliefs regarding the existence of climate change and the issues of whether the government should put more effort into reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, the degree of basic awareness of the climate crisis is roughly the same in both countries. However, second, there's a difference in the allocation of responsibility for reducing greenhouse gas and the way of setting international climate goals. Indian actors think that international reduction goals should be decided based on per capita GHG emissions, and economic growth should be allowed for developing countries, more than so how Japanese actors think. Nevertheless, the right to growth is still got a little support even among Indian actors, as the average of this score is still less than 3 as the result indicates, which is a negative in this 5-point Likert scale question. Third, there's a significant difference in terms of the idea that the energy transition offers a new business opportunity for making a profit. Indian actors show more favorable attitude towards this idea than Japanese actors. The different attitude can be further highlighted if we focus on the degree to which belief sparks contention and controversy in each country. Here, we take an average score in the x-axis as a general degree of support for the idea, and the standard deviation in the y-axis as an indicator of controversy. And we see interesting difference in both countries. In India, the idea that energy transition can provide new business opportunity is highly supported and non-controversial issue. By contrast, it is very controversial issue in among Japanese actors. In addition, nuclear energy, emission trading, and whether Japan should take an international leadership is a highly contested issue in Japan. Conversely, the certainty in climate science and voluntary action among business actors is a very controversial issue in India. But putting aside, interestingly, the position of the items looks relatively similar in both countries. So now finally, let's turn to the constellation of policy networks in Japan and India. We have identified a cluster of actors in both countries. In addition, we have checked what opinion each coalition shares. There are some beliefs that the coalition members don't share, and such opinion doesn't serve as a glue of the coalitions. The score is positive if the actors on average support the idea and it is shown as a solid line. Conversely, if coalition actors on average against the ideas, the score is negative and shown with a dotted line. Let us start with the Indian result on the right side. Cluster 3 is supporting voluntary, 4 is right. The cluster 4 is supporting the voluntary approach by the business actors, whereas cluster 1 is against. For Indian coalitions are divided over this issue. However, aside from this issue, there is no cleavage. What coalition 3 supports are not challenged by any other coalitions. By combining with the slide before, we can judge that all Indian coalitions moderately support any mitigation actions. The picture differs greatly in Japanese constellation. The basic mitigation actions, nuclear energy, the degree of consumption, and the emission trading are all contested by several actors. What is more, the structure of contestation is not something like pro and con towards a mitigation, but much more complex and cross-cutting over the several issues. So in belief, there are multiple cleavages occurring among the core beliefs in Japanese climate policy process. So here's a summary of this presentation. As we have seen, there are a few different differences between India and Japan regarding general support for the issues of whether government should devote more efforts to climate policy. However, how advocacy coalition is created matters for the actual policy process. And in this regard, there's a great difference in India and Japan. Moreover, we have attributed these different privilege structures to the difference in the game context of the energy market. In India, where the continual growth in energy consumption is expected, it is a non-zero-sum game. In these circumstances, advocacy coalitions just pursue their own interests and ideas. Consequently, the coalition structures become very fragmented and very few cleavages over the issues arise. By contrast, in Japan, where one win of the policy immediately implies the loss of the others, the advocacy coalitions are challenging each other. As a result, the constellation of the cleavage structures among coalitions become highly complex and cross-cutting. We acknowledge that this two-country cases study in itself has a very limited generalizability. Nevertheless, it contributes to unique insights into why recent proactive action is occurring among the developing countries and how such internationally visible change is brought by the domestic cleavage structures. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, now we would like to invite the questions and comments from the floor. Oops. Sorry. So any questions? Okay, then may I take the advantage of the clarifying? Maybe many of us are not too familiar with this network analysis. Keiichi, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on the constellation of policy network and cleavage structure. I don't know which page number it was, but you had this map with Japan and India. Maybe if you can explain a little more about it.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. So what this picture shows is that which coalitions, which is a group of actors, supports what kind of policy options. And this, for example, here is okay. I will show you. Just a moment. Right. So for example, here we identified the third cluster in India, and this cluster of actors support on average the per capita emissions, the idea of per capita emissions, and they also highly acknowledge that there's a climate change policy problem is occurring. And the point is, we can connect this constellation with the idea of the cleavage structures. So how we can identify the cleavage structures is that it's very simple. If there is one actor which is supporting the idea, and if there is simultaneously also the other actors which are opposing the policy ideas, then it indicates that there is a kind of the conflict about the ideas over that issues. Here, in this case, the voluntary approach. So if we take this if we observe these constellations, then we identified only one cleavages here in India, which is very super simple. And on the other hand, in Japan, it looks so complicated. So what this means, just for example, just to take one very clear case is nuclear. Two coalitions, no, three coalitions are supporting to increase the nuclears in Japan. On the other hand, there's one coalition who strongly opposes the expansion of the nuclears. I think this is the NGO sectors. So in these circumstances, there's a kind of the conflict between these three clusters versus this clusters. But if there's only one issue, then the picture should be much more simple. But what makes it more complicated is that instead of nuclear, this JP2 just advocates that we should do more mitigation. But this view is again challenged by the other coalition, namely JP1, which actually supports the nuclear energy. So with this constellation, there's always a conflict, and so on. So it's a kind of a deadlock situation, actually. So this constellation makes Japanese climate policy kind of the laggard in the international comparison. So that is our explanation.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful. Thank you. So I would like to invite questions and comments.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Keiichi. Your contrast non-zero-sum game in India and zero-sum game in Japan. Yeah, this idea is very interesting and very stimulating. But let us think about in the case of Germany and United Kingdom. Yeah, I think both countries are very typical reading countries to improve climate change policy. And especially Germany, as you know, Chancellor Merkel led nuclear phase out to the end of 2022, yeah, the end of this year. And recently, Germany also engaged in a phase out of all nuclear, all coal power plants, maybe by 2038. Yeah. Very aggressive climate and energy transition policy. But in my view, Germany and United Kingdom also their energy situation looks like zero-sum game. But in spite of such a zero-sum game, in Germany and in the United Kingdom can change their climate change and energy transition policy. How can you explain these situation?
Right. I think it's a good point. So we admit that this contrast of the zero-sum game and non-zero-sum game, it's we still think that it's a good contrast if we look at developing countries context and the developed countries context. But of course, within the developed countries, there's a lot of variations which cannot be entirely attributed by the game structures. I don't know exactly what is happening with the UK, but in case of Germany, I would say that it's still the zero-sum game. For example, after Merkel introduced the nuclear phase-out policy, there was a strong backlash from the coal industry and also the nuclear industries. And recently, regarding about the coal phase-out, there's also harsh battles. So I think how these battles occurs is still the same between Germany and Japan. So then what makes a difference between these two countries? I think they need another explanation variable. So far, what I know is that in German case, the policy actors share strong belief that climate policy makes a profit. So it's the belief of the green growth. It's much more widely shared among German actors. Whereas in Japan, as far as I know, if we compare all the data we have in the common data, Japan is one of the lowest average score in terms of the green growth belief, because there are strong believers of the green growth, but there's so strong deniers, even the governmental side, which is really exceptional in my view. So I think within the developed countries, I think that there needs another explanatory variable. I hope I answered correctly to your questions, but I welcome your further comments.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Ichihara-san, Masako Ichihara from RIHN has a question to Sato-san.
Hello, nice to meet you. I'm Masako Ichihara from Research Institute in Humanities of Nature in Kyoto. Thank you for your insightful presentation. I'd like to ask you the two questions. One is about your analysis of compound. As far as I know, your research is based on a content analysis, right? No, so in your slide, you collected data from some writing material, and you coded the categories or word term. So my question is whether the material is what kind of, I mean, in India, maybe majority of population is relatively poor. So maybe it's important to, the policy should be reflect their opinion, their will, but many Indian people may have less accessibility to publish some writing material or a report or opinion. So it's very different point of, between India and Japan. So whether your research is successfully catch the opinion of the such relatively vulnerable or poor people. That's my first question. And the second question is a little bit similar to the question from Professor Hasegawa. So you say that in India there is a zero-sum game and Japan is non-zero-sum game. But I'm wondering if Japan used to be in the stage of zero-sum game. So if is there chronological change, maybe India in the future, India might reach in the stage of the non-zero-sum game. How do you think about that? It's my second question. Thank you.
Right. Thank you for your questions. I think I go from the first questions, which is more like a kind of clarification question. So what we did with this data analysis is that it's not a document analysis. It's a questionnaire survey to the core policy organizations in both countries. For example, in Japanese case, the WWF was one of the respondent, the Business Federation is another respondent, and so on. So basically, what we did is we contacted some sort of the core main organizations with regard to the climate policy, and they filled up our questionnaire survey. So I think in this regard, I do think that the basic condition between Japan and India is almost the same, because in Indian case, we also contacted, not me, but the Pradip, contacted the major policy actors, such as the Business Federation in India, or that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But you may be right in that sense that with this procedure, this doesn't reflect the kind of, let's say, the ordinary citizen's view. So it is completely a different dimension of this analysis.
Okay.
It's only the kind of policy elite, I would say. Regarding the second question, yes, you are absolutely right. It's kind of just a chronological phase. I don't know exactly when it would be, but in some time, the emerging market in India will be saturated, and then they will go into the direction of the non-zero-sum game. But the point here is that although it is merely just the energy market situation, but as we have seen, it greatly affects the overall mood of the climate policy. So for this kind of the time difference, what we are observing is a kind of the interesting point that how structure determines the preferences of the actors and how actors react not only to the energy policy, but also the other related policies. So I think this is a kind of the interesting point of this analysis.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Any other question? We have 2 more minutes.
Hi, do we have time for one question?
Yeah, very quick.
Hi, Dr. Keiichi. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. So I was a bit curious about how did you zero in on these organizations? Like, how did you choose organizations, particular organizations from each of these countries first? And second, like you have shown coalitions as one node in the network. So I was also curious about what is the composition of these coalitions. Perhaps this is a bigger question, so you can skip it if there's no time.
Right. I go with the second question, and I do have the data about what is the composition of each clusters, and I think we actually already wrote a paper which is under review. But I don't have that data right now in my hand. So sorry, I can show you that data. But there are obviously some kind of like NGO clusters and some kind of business clusters and so on in both countries. Regarding the first questions, how we selected exactly this the target organizations, I think it would be better than as for the Japanese data, we as I said, we coded newspaper articles and how many times each organization appears in each newspapers. And we also cross-checked that the disappearance of the newspaper is actually quite a good indicator to identify the main organizations. I think Pradip might want to add how you chose the Indian actors. Pradip, would you like to add something?
It's more or less same from the media actors to the narrowing down to the top 100 or close to 100 actors. But I think time is up, so we should go to the next presentation and discuss. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, now let's move on to the next presentation. The next speaker is Rajshri SHUKLA. She's a PhD candidate in Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. Her title is Energy Justice in Post-Paris India, unpacking the discursive consensus and conflict through storylines and discourse coalitions. Rajshri, please.
Right. Thank you for the introduction. I'll just share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rajshri, as Professor Keiko introduced. So I'm going to present a paper that we have been working on titled Energy Justice in India in post-Paris India, unpacking the discursive consensus and conflict through storylines and discourse coalitions. So I'd like to start with a few media clippings which highlight the energy justice issues. So we're already aware that there are existing multiple justice issues in the current fossil fuel driven energy systems that cut across multiple vulnerabilities and identities like age, indigenous communities. And now as we transition towards renewable sources, we see such inequities emerging in the new sector, getting reproduced in new forms in the emerging renewable sector. So this highlights the importance of building a rigorous research-based discourse around energy justice, and especially in countries like India for a few reasons. First, these countries are underrepresented in the overall energy justice literature. And second, whatever work has been done regarding energy justice, it hasn't exclusively looked into the discursive dynamics that result in these energy injustices. So with this backdrop, the main objective of our study is to map the energy justice discourse in India and to uncover the dominant themes which emerge from this discourse and the actors who make up this discourse and voice these dominant themes. So coming on to the energy justice concept and how we have defined it for our study, as we have adopted the definition given by Sovapool and Gakuin, who have essentially given two main aspects of energy justice. The first one is analytical, which has multiple components like distributive, that is, how are the costs and benefits around energy systems distributed across various social sections? To what extent are the procedures inclusive around energy systems? And do we recognize the multiple vulnerabilities that emerge from these energy systems? And then finally, retributive confers to the how do we compensate people, how do we compensate the vulnerabilities that arise? Now, this analytical aspect operates at a more theoretical level. They've given another aspect, a more empirically applicable aspect, which is the energy justice as a policy decision-making tool, which essentially has 8 components. The first one is availability, that is a high-quality, continuous supply of energy needs to be ensured for all, and it has to be made affordable, following due processes that are inclusive, ensured through proper governance, where accountable information is presented to all the stakeholders involved, along with ensuring the sustainability, environmental sustainability per se, of these efforts of ensuring availability. And they should also take into account the intergenerational and intragenerational inequity issues that are already existing, and also the actors whose actions lead to these energy injustices should be held responsible. Now, if we look at energy policy in India through the lens of this framework, we see that prior to 2000, the energy policy was mainly focused on the agenda of availability. As in the previous presentation, it was pointed, there were some external oil shock and in domestic level there were a lot of cases of corruption. So this period saw increased nationalization of the energy sources and energy processes so that availability can be ensured to a large population, the majority, the considerable portion of which was living in poverty. After 2000, we see, due to external pressure of contributing more ambitiously in the international climate negotiations, we see the element of sustainability getting introduced in the policy. So in this period, we see the formation of National Action Plan on Climate Change, the main focus of which was integrating more and more renewables in the energy system in order to make them more sustainable. Uh, in 2015 to 2020, we see the effort of integrating sustainability as well as availability more strongly into the energy policy. So because of these two elements being dominant, we see two policy trajectories opposing in content emerging in the Indian energy policy. So the first is focused on availability. So so the government introduced two major schemes for increasing the availability of energy. One aimed at universal electrification, and the other aimed at providing clean energy fuel in the form of LPG cylinders. So both these schemes are majorly fueled by the fossil fuels, and therefore there has been focus on fossil fuel, especially coal expansion. The second trajectory that is emerging is more and more integration of renewable energy in the energy policy and the energy system. Since India made ambitious commitments at the Paris climate meet in 2015, therefore there has been a sustained effort in increasing the share of renewables. So these two policy trajectories that emerge correspond to the elements of availability and sustainability and striking a balance between the two. So as we see, the energy policy has proceeded to incorporate various elements of energy justice. And in this process, various actors have played major roles, framing their agendas in a certain way so that some particular energy justice element can be incorporated into energy policy. So, and in this process, there has been some consensus, there has been some conflict. So to theoretically contextualize this consensus and conflict, we use the concepts of storylines and discourse coalitions. Storylines divided into two, where there are storylines where the actors are in consensus while referring to them. And then there are storylines where the actors are in conflict, resulting in discourse coalitions comprising of diverse actors. So deriving from this conceptual framework, we have two major research questions. The first one is which storylines on energy justice lead to consensus among actors, and which storylines on energy justice lead to conflict among actors, resulting in the formation of discourse coalitions. So to approach these research questions, we have derived our data from 9 major media outlets, English media outlets per se, which are highest in circulation. These were downloaded from Factiva database employing the representative keyword search string. So this search yielded, after cleaning the data and deleting the duplicates, it yielded a sample of 141 articles. These were then imported into Discourse Network Analyzer, which allows for content analysis as well as deriving various kind of networks from the coded data. And the analysis was done using DNA, and representation of the figures was done using the software visioning. So coming on to the results, these are divided into two major sections in line with our two research questions. The first section discusses the consensus storylines, which are further divided into 3 broad energy justice related themes. The second section is about conflicting storylines, and these are again divided into 2 broad themes. Coming on to the consensus storylines, these are 6 storylines are subsumed under 3 broad themes. So the first one, the recognition of intragenerational justice relates to the storylines where actors recognize that there are social vulnerabilities and there are social injustices resulting from those vulnerabilities, and these are very strongly connected to access or no access to energy. And to effectively deal with such vulnerabilities, we need to ensure proper energy security to the vulnerable population. The next interrelated theme is ensuring availability, where the actors are discussing what mechanisms need to be strengthened in order to ensure and expand availability across populations. For example, the international cooperation needs to be strengthened, the regulatory reforms need to be introduced. The third theme is where the actors are focusing on availability, the efforts to ensure that availability, but also ensuring the sustainability of these efforts in terms of research-based sustainable solutions like renewables. So if we see these themes and if we look at particularly the frequencies, more number of statements have been made towards the storylines where there's an effort to incorporate other elements of energy justice besides availability. So this effort has also resulted in the conflict. So the first set of conflict that we see is on public schemes and market-led mechanisms. So the coalition that we see in light pink titled availability, majorly dominated by state actors, are of the opinion that the public schemes like those targeted at universal electrification have been largely successful, and they have been able to address the energy poverty issues in the country. And they're also of the view that introducing some market mechanisms like privatizing the public energy utilities will result in further expansion of energy access in the country. The opposition to this coalition comes from two other coalitions. The first one in light purple, that is availability plus intragenerational justice coalition, majorly dominated by civil society organizations. The actors here are of the view that although these schemes, public schemes targeted at availability, have made a significant expansion of energy access, but they have failed to effectively address other underlying socio-structural issues, intragenerational justice issues, and they have to be made more nuanced in order to make them effectively address these issues. The second, the other conflict comes from the other coalition titled Availability Plus Due Process, which is dominated by the public sector trade unions who oppose the government's decision to privatize major public sector utilities. They argue that if they are privatized, then the energy expansion will be targeted towards profit maximization and not towards public good. So that's a conflict around public schemes and market-led mechanisms. The other set of storylines has yielded conflict around the sources of energy that are to be used and the various actors propound. So this conflict basically underlies the dual trajectory that energy policy is right now traversing in India, based on both fossil fuels as well as renewables. So the coalition, fossil coalition and non-fossil coalition, support these sources of energy, arguing that in a developing country like India, we need these sources in order to expand energy access. The coalition, the renewable coalition dominated by civil society actors, again, is of the view, they question the sustainability of these sources, the fossils and the non-fossils, and they support renewable as the answer to the availability versus sustainability conundrum that the country is facing right now. So coming on to the conclusion, our study has demonstrated that the various energy justice principles, although important, theoretically equally important, assume different kind of importance for diverse actors, and as a result, they are sometimes complementary to each other, and at others they are in conflict with each other. The policy implications are basically three. The first one is if there is a consensus on intergenerational vulnerabilities, the the entrenched socioeconomic inequities that are already there. So since there is recognition of them in the wider discourse, there is a possibility of them positively being incorporated in the energy decision making. Next is overwhelmingly positive discourse around renewables may mask the potential injustices that may emerge from these systems, and they may not be able to address it in the energy policy making in future. The next is about the bridge organization. As was visible in both the figures, there are organizations which share ties with the opposite coalition. So these organizations have the capacity to facilitate policy co-learning between the coalitions, but for this to happen, the due process component of the energy justice needs to be strengthened in the energy decision making, so that diverse voices find place in the overall decision making. And there are, of course, limitations to it. We focus on English, but majorly on English media, where there is a rich literature, rich discourse in the vernacular languages as well. So that limits the scope of the study, and also what the actors say in media, and what it just might represent a very strategically formed statement, and it might not converge with what they do and what their actions actually are. So thank you very much. That's it from my side. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Rajshri. Now I'd like to welcome questions from the floor.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No.
Sorry, Professor Hasegawa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You go first.
Okay, I think
NAKAZAWA? Yeah.
I think Nakazawa-san had a
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your very interesting presentation. Out of just curiosity, I'd like to ask that, how common is that, these energy justice or energy poverty or such terminologies or keywords were used in, English media in India? Because, in Japan, I haven't heard of, energy justice or, energy poverty appeared in Japanese media, actually. It's very rare. So related to your methodology, I'd like to ask, how common it is in Indian, English media.
Right. That's a very interesting question. So in India, the discourse around energy, the justice and energy security is quite dominant, because in the international climate negotiation, energy security is pushed as an agenda, because there is they argue that because there are the large population of our country is energy poor, we need to ensure energy justice to them, and the justice and equity element remain dominant in the international climate policy as well. So this actually relates to the overall climate policy negotiations and what India's position is there in those negotiations. So these phrases of energy security, energy poverty, and energy justice appear a lot, and especially during the climate negotiations. So we just the selection of keywords was in two phases. First, we just intuitively chose two words of energy justice and energy poverty, and we conducted a search string. Then we coded certain articles, and then based on those articles and some of the dominant keywords emerging, we made a keyword search string, which the final keyword search string. I hope that answers.
Yeah, okay, thank you. It's another very interesting contrast between Japan and India, in terms of, terminologies used in, media regarding climate policies.
I think
Thank
that
you.
also underlies the developed versus developing country debate.
Yes.
Yes,
Thank you.
very indeed. Yeah, thank you very much. That's very interesting. Professor Hasegawa?
Okay. My question is a small question, but anyway, Rajshri's presentation is very wonderful and very clear-cut presentation. Thank you very much. My question is, Compon protocol requires using three typical newspapers. So Compon Japan also uses relatively liberal newspaper, Asahi newspaper, and relatively conservative newspaper, Yomiuri, and economic paper, Nikkei, like Financial Times. But in this case, you use 9 papers. Why did you use such 9 newspapers? I guess it depends on some very special situation of journalism or newspaper in India. Can you explain some detail?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for your question, Professor Koichi. So this study is not basically attached to the Compon protocol first. And the main focus of our study was not to watch the type of discourse and the type of discourse that particular newspapers are promoting. The focus was to gauge the overall discourse across the newspapers. So it was a general. These research questions are general to these data sources. And so we chose these newspapers, English newspapers, which are highest in circulation, and their business, especially their business counterparts, because mostly the energy news is reported in the business section of these newspapers or the business supplements of these newspapers. So that's the, if Professor Swarnakar wants to add to it.
Yeah, and also the number of reports are actually less. So if we take only 3, either have to expand the timeline, because also Compon protocols, I mean, this is not the Compon thing, but mostly followed the similar kind of a thing. So we followed like after 2015. And if we narrow down to 3 newspapers, like we have done in the climate policy case, it is very less number of articles, and we need around 300 statements, as the protocol also designed by the team and Keiichi. So we are not getting enough statements to analyze our views. So this is another practical reason to include more newspapers. That's the thing. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. All right, I have 2 questions, 2 people who wants to ask questions. Keiichi Sato?
Hi, Raji. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I think it's really interesting to focus on energy justice and how it's related with the other components. My question is very simple. At your last slide, you concluded that renewables hide some energy justice and that kind of stuff. And maybe I just missed, but could you explain a bit more from which result this conclusion came from?
Mhm.
Okay. So I'll share my screen again. So if we see in the consensus storylines, we see if we look at the frequency, the major focus has been, the major consensus has been that renewables can contribute to achieving energy justice. And this has been an overwhelmingly positive discourse, especially around decentralized renewables, that they may lead to more democratic energy systems. But if we look at the literature, they have reported multiple kinds of injustices emerging from the renewable energy systems as well. So these injustices do not find a place in the overall discourse, the overall general media discourse. So that's how I derived the conclusion that since these, the discussion around these inequities is missing, it might lead to them being missed out in the decision making as well.
Okay. So if this argument would have been connected with other equity statement and so on, maybe your conclusion would have been different. But since it is so dominated, you concluded in that way.
Yeah.
Okay. I got it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Right, I have a question from Masako Ichihara.
Sorry. Thank you so much. My question was coincidentally very close to Sato Sensei. It's my simple curiosity. In terms of energy justice, in Japan, mostly husband is very dominant to decide what kind of resource energy differences to take. So generally, gender minority has a poor say to decide what kind of energy to take. Is it the same in India? So I mean that generally saying women is more weaker than men to have an incentive or something. Thank you.
Yeah. But thank you for such an interesting question, Masako. Actually, the first theme of consensus storyline, the recognition of intragenerational justice. So the markers of this intragenerational injustice is one of the markers is gender. So gender has appeared to be a dominant marker that is being discussed, which is contributing to energy injustice. So the access to the energy sources is defined by what gender you are, and this has been recognized. And if we look at the coalition in purple, the actors here also highlight the importance of gender inequity in contributing to energy poverty. So gender is a dominant aspect of the energy justice discourse in India, same as in Japan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there any question?
Greg.
Yeah, I have another question.
Yes, please.
Oh, Trencher, he's raising a hand, so after you.
Okay. Gregory? Greg, did you raise your hand?
Okay.
Hello. Okay. As I cannot confirm the raising their hands, Nozawa-san, you can go ahead and ask the question.
Okay. Again, let me ask about, a simple question, just out of curiosity. And in your analysis, have you found any discourse about, disparity between urban areas which consume energy and rural areas which usually are production place of energy? In Japan, disparity between urban areas and rural areas, it's kind of, an issue in terms of energy justice. Have you found any discourse about that point in your research?
Yeah. Thank you for pointing this out. So this is more than urban-rural divide. The divide that has been highlighted is the interstate divide in India. So these various states are the poverty levels in different states of India is different. So which is quite strongly related to the energy access in these states. So apart from gender, the other marker of intragenerational injustice that has been referred to is the interstate differences. The difference between various states where energy access where energy access has reached to a large section of people against those states where the energy access hasn't reached a wide number of people, or if it has reached, it is not a sustained or a proper supply of energy. So the interstate differences are more prominent in the energy Indian discourse than the urban-rural differences.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other question?
I think Professor Trencher is raising his hand.
Okay. Oh, hey, Greg. You can ask your question. Professor Trencher? Greg?
You can stop sharing the screen.
Okay.
Professor Trencher is speaking, but we can't hear him.
Greg, we cannot hear you.
You can type the question. Okay, he's saying that I want to ask.
Type my question.
Oh, now we can hear you.
Sorry about this.
Professor Trencher, we can hear you now. I think he can't hear us now.
Yeah, he's typing.
Yeah.
Okay, it reads He wants to ask, are there any success stories of coal transition in India with policy guidance? Rajshri, please.
Professor SWARNAKER, if you would like to take this question.
Okay, so yeah.
For example, in Germany, there is ongoing effort to give compensations and retraining to affected communities. What about India? That's a great question.
If I may add, I don't think coal transition has reached that phase in India where success stories can emerge. I mean,
It's
Professor
just
SWARNAKER,
started.
I
Basically,
think so.
what we can say, it's we in India, we are thinking about coal transition. It's just thinking. So if you look at the data, actually you have not seen any closure of coal mines, and the power plants are closed due to some other reasons, maybe a little bit environmental reasons, but no systematic closing down either thermal power plants or coal mines. But there are some discussion, and in near future we are going to see this coal transition. And what about these success stories? We don't have that success or failure stories, but we have some stories, and I think that is going to be presented by Mudit and Saakshi from our primary field survey in the coal block. So that is more from the community or the survey, and this data is from the media. As Keiichi mentioned earlier, it is more from the elite policy actors and what they are thinking, and not from the ground. And from the ground, I think Saakshi and Mudit is going to present our very recent study, which we are writing right now, but some interesting findings and some direction about how we want to go about coal transition. So I think in the next presentation, we are going to see that this answer is in the next presentation. Some part of the answer, not everything. Yeah.
Yeah, more than success stories also there. I think right now the research is focused on what are the factors that are inhibiting any kind of success stories. And these factors are multiple in India, which I think I'm not sure if Saakshi and Mudit might cover. But right now, no success stories as such.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have 7 more minutes. Any other questions from the floor?
If there is no question, I'd like to add a few points. Keiko, if may I?
Yes, please.
Okay. So this study opens up actually a lot of new directions in Indian energy discourse, because as we see, few important things. One is the access, as earlier presented by Masako, that okay, Japan is importing 100% coal from outside the country. Here we have enough coal production and also power plants. So the question to the success stories is that most of the transition literature or the work or the policies happening in the coal mine, like the production of coal, more focused on this, not the power plant. So our group at IIT Kanpur is actually also focusing not only the coal mines, but also power plants. And because it's also have a long history, and 1 and 2 companies which are actually very closely public sector companies, it's not like a fully independent business identity, they are dominating this story. But the question, 3 important questions are there. One is the access. So because we are not actually, energy access is not very homogeneous in India. So we need more study on access. And in the access, we can see about the perspective of the gender, perspective of the marginalized community. So these kind of things we need to go to the field and study. And this paper actually gives that direction that, okay, we need to understand something on access. Next is this energy security. And the security questions also comes up in the Japan when we are talking like if we are too much dependent on oil, and if there is an oil shock or some international war, then what is going to happen with the oil. But if it is coal, which is we can, Japan can import from multiple countries, maybe from India, Indonesia, Australia, or China, whatever is feasible, we can move from one option to another option. So we need more studies on this energy security. That also gives a direction. But in terms of the justice questions, we can do a lot of studies like the procedural justice in terms of the due process followed. So in this entire transition, like if the carbon tax is one procedure of reducing the greenhouse gas or the carbon emission, so how this is happening in India? Is it possible of any kind of taxation or any kind of government intervention or the role of private player? What is the due process and the engagement of different policy actors in the entire policy making process? So I think these three important directions this research gives, and that's open up for a lot of other important research, because we have very less amount of literature on this energy justice in India. So this summarizes the importance or the novelty of this research.
Thank you. Masako, I see your hand raised.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about your conclusion, because I was very much interested in when you said about the energy access, and then it's very important for especially the community itself. And then I suppose that there is a big trade-offs between energy access and maybe domestic coal mines. And what do you think is the perception of the community itself? Do you think it's more like, energy access is more important than, think about the coal phase out or something like that? Because you produce coal domestically, and I think it's very much different from the Japanese point of view, and also the perspective of justice.
Yeah, quickly, in 2 minutes, I'd like to say that you rightly said, I completely agree with you, that the community believes that we first need the access, either it's coming from RE or coal or oil, it doesn't matter. If we don't have electricity, and also in many places we have electricity, but not like 24/7 electricity. Sometime we have electricity, sometime we don't have. I mean, electricity and energy is different, but I'm just focusing on the electricity because people like to connect more on this, and the next presentation will also talk about this. But the thing is that as the common belief is that we have coal, and why we are not using that coal, why we have to depend on certain technology which is not tried and tested. Like we know there are some issues with the solar, it's decentralized is fine, but running industries or the grid-based solar thing or thermal solar, this kind of things is not explored. And recently government is exploring the possibility of hydrogen or green hydrogen, and you rightly mentioned that all the hydrogen is actually not very green. In some concern is there, but it is not tried and tested. That is another thing. Coal is there with you at your home, and access is not there. So the easiest way to have access is through coal, and even you don't have to depend on the other countries for that. So this is the dilemma which is there, but I think we need more study, particularly the perception study of the community, how the community is feeling about that, and we are trying to do that in the next 2 years actually. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting avenue to broaden up our project. Thank you. Okay, I think we are just on time for the next presentation. So I would like to welcome Mudit Swing and Saakshi CHAUHAN, both from Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. Mudit is a postdoctoral fellow, and Saakshi CHAUHAN is a project scientist at Just Transition Research Center. Okay, Mudit and Saakshi. And the title of their presentation is Just Transition Away from Coal, Exploring the Stakeholder Perspective from the State of Uttar Pradesh and West Bengal. All right, Mudit and Saakshi, please.
Hello, and thank you for the introduction. I am Saakshi, and I will be talking about the major stakeholders from the coal industry in India. So I will be covering this section from a macro scale by setting the context of the energy sector in India, followed by a brief description of the Indian coal industry and its stakeholders. So firstly, it is important to distinguish between energy and electricity. Energy here implies primary energy consumption that includes heating, transportation, cooking, and electricity. Electricity, in fact, is a small part of the total energy mix. Now, India consumes about 9,500 terawatt hours of energy, of which 1,400 terawatt hours accounts for electricity consumption. And that is 5% of the global electricity consumption, making India one of the largest consumers of electricity. However, the per capita consumption is only 1,200 kilowatt hours, which is about 1/3 of the world average. These are the climate action targets that India announced at COP26 summit in Glasgow. The government of India had initially set the renewable energy installed capacity target at 175 gigawatts by 2022 at the Paris Agreement, which was then increased to 450 gigawatts by 2030. Recently, this target has been again increased to 500 gigawatts. However, as of now, we only have an installed capacity of 147 gigawatts, of which 47 gigawatts is from large hydropower. But large hydropower cannot really be considered a clean form of energy, and therefore, excluding that, there's a total 100 gigawatts of clean energy installed capacity. And coal accounts for 52% of the overall installed capacity, and the absolute capacity has been constantly rising. Post Paris Agreement, we did see a slight decrease in the rate of increase, but the overall share of coal in the electricity mix has barely changed. Now, the energy mix in India mostly comprises of oil and coal, and the electricity mix mostly comprises of coal. Oil is responsible for emissions from the transport sector, and that sector will shift to clean energy, that is through electric vehicles, only when the electricity mix changes its composition from coal being dominant to renewable energy being dominant. Also, even though renewable energy, excluding large hydro, occupies a 24% share in the total installed capacity, the actual generation is only 10%. So even though there are several sectors dependent on coal, electricity is the key element which can bring about energy transition or a coal phase out at a large scale. And now we come to the major stakeholders of the coal sector, and we start with the power. Over 700,000 people have been found to be dependent on the thermal power sector, both directly and indirectly. There are power plants that have been running for several decades, whose capacity was increased, more people were employed, which basically made the economy highly dependent on this sector. A power plant also pushed the development of small businesses and enterprises that catered to the needs of the people directly employed at the thermal power plant. Some states that you see in this figure have a higher number of power plants when compared to the installed capacity, which indicates a proportionally higher indirect employment in the area and subsequently a higher impact of closure. The Indian brick industry is the second largest brick producer in the world and contributes 0.7% to the GDP and employs about 10 million people. So the main problem here is that the workers are not skilled, as most of them are involved in the molding part of the job. And employment is also seasonal and workers are migratory, which makes implementation of retraining and reskilling programs to such a large population very difficult and expensive. India is also the second largest steel producer in the world and contributes over 2% to the GDP and employs about 2.5 million people directly and indirectly. But out of India's total greenhouse emissions, 9% are from steel industry alone. And the import of coking coal is also very high at $8 to $10 billion annually. So this makes transition to cleaner fuel necessary, both from an economic and environmental perspective. Transition in this sector is actually not going to be as difficult as other sectors because 85% of the workers are skilled. Only those workers who are directly involved in handling coal will need to be trained, mostly in handling cleaner fuels, because steel production will still happen, but only the fuel or the energy source will have to be substituted. Now, one of the most important stakeholders that basically affects the entire economy, the state and central governments. Over $5.5 billion were collected in the form of royalties, cess, and other taxes from Coal India Limited alone in 2020. 62% of this amount comes from only 3 of the Coal India Limited subsidiaries, and we are at the moment working in the region of one of these subsidiaries, that is Northern Coalfields Limited. Coal, therefore, is a big part of the Indian economy, and the state and central governments will suffer a huge reduction in tax collection as a result of coal phase out that will ultimately impact the economy down to a microeconomic scale. A significant contributor to the Indian railways is the coal industry, that is responsible for providing 44% of the freight revenue and 40% of the total rail revenue. More or less 50% of the coal in India is transported through rail. States located farther from a coal mine have to incur a higher transportation cost. So quantity, distance, and price are the 3 main components that decide the cost of coal transportation. Now, because in the last few years, the plant load factor of thermal power plants has been decreasing and distance of transport is also decreasing due to better connectivity, the average revenue of railways declined. They had to increase the price of transportation to account for the loss in revenue. So you see how sensitive this sector is and how dependent it is on the coal industry. And this situation is only going to get worse as renewable energy installed capacity expands and demand for coal further decreases. Another fact I want to highlight here is that Indian Railways highly subsidizes passenger transport cost, and much of this cost is borne by the coal industry. So a coal phase out will not only affect the rail economy, but also the consumers, as the cross subsidy may decrease due to increasing losses. But the Indian government, instead of slowly diversifying its source of income and slowly moving away from coal, has decided to undertake a $3 billion project in the eastern part of India to facilitate coal production, coal transportation. Finally, the coal mining sector in India. Now, India produced a total of 716 million tons of coal in the last financial year and imported about 215 million tons. That adds up to almost 1 billion tons of coal usage per year, making it the world's second largest producer and consumer of coal. Coal mining has been part of the private sector in India up until 1956, when the government set up the National Coal Development Corporation to increase production. Then in the early 70s, nearly all coal mines were nationalized, leading to formation of Bharat Coking Coal Limited and Coal Mines Authority to take charge of the coking and non-coking coal respectively. These were merged together in 1975 to form the Coal India Limited, which as of 2021 is the world's largest coal producer and supplies 83% of the total coal in India from its 352 mines spread across 8 Indian states. The coal industry in India is almost synonymous with Coal India Limited, and these are all of its subsidiaries that produced 570 million tons of coal in the last financial year. And the Coal India Limited alone directly employs over 250,000 people. And apart from these workers, there are about 500,000 pensioners, with coal industry having contributed over $500 million till date to the pension funds. We visited the coal mines of two of its subsidiaries, that are Eastern Coalfields Limited, located in the state of West Bengal, and Northern Coalfields Limited, located in the states of Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh. And Dr. Mudit will cover this in detail. So over to you, Dr. Mudit, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Saakshi.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, so I'll continue from here to tell more about the realities from ground, our observations, our interactions with the community members, trade union leaders, and other local stakeholders. And basically, we just ended up collecting data from coal mine workers and local residents from power plants and coal mines in both the states. So there was like 900 interviews our team conducted in both the states, and it had just finished on Tuesday, so like a couple of days back. So we had to like clean and analyze and to present something before you. So we only have some preliminary findings and insights. So we'll be happy to discuss, and we'll also seek suggestions as to what are the key things that you might want to hear from the ground stories and data. So, so to just set the context, we have Uttar Pradesh and West Bengal as 2 states in India. there were a couple of reasons why we went to select these two states. A, yes, it was a mandate of GTRC lab, and B, like Uttar Pradesh is the largest state in India with the most number of power plants, and it has also underwent a lot of closures across its various power plants, which has been operating since past over 25 or 30 years. So it has, so we have a kind of a good representation of looking at the impact of closure of power plants which are driven by coal. So so that's why we selected Uttar Pradesh. And we also have one coal mine field that is shared with its neighboring states. So there are this tiny region, if you can see in the lower left portion, this is the Singrauli coal field in Uttar Pradesh in Sonbhadra district. And if you can see the concentric circles we drew from the units, so around the units. So there were 3 coal mines in Singrauli field we selected, and one was the private owned power plant, Renu Sagar power plant. And all these 3 mines are, as Saakshi mentioned, are owned and operated by Northern Coalfield Limited. And we overall selected, if you just notice the tiny white dots, these are our sample villages from where people go to work in these plants. And also there are population which indirectly depend on these plants. So likewise in West Bengal, we covered Raniganj coalfield area and Bandel thermal power plant. And in contrast to Uttar Pradesh, in West Bengal, the villages are known by its coal refinery or coal mines name itself. So that's why you will see, you will notice a little bit different picture than the Uttar Pradesh. So on right hand side, you can see the kind of distribution, geospatial distribution of the samples we selected, and we just arbitrarily selected Raniganj coalfield to just have a reference point and have an idea about the location. So it was like approximately 10-kilometer radial distance around Raniganj coalfield. So so this is the place and location and how we selected the samples and we collected the data. So 500 interviews from local community, including coal mine workers who are affected, that is, who lost their job due to closure, and also the population which depend upon these coal mines and power plant, like small shop owners, the mechanics, and other people who indirectly depend upon the economy driven by the power plant operation and coal mines. So this was the introduction of sample and location and then how we selected and how we went about this. Saakshi, can we go to the next slide? Yeah, so having such a large size of data that we collected from December end to until this Tuesday, as I mentioned, the first thing we try to analyze is very least talked about or very little knowledge we have about energy transition perception. The perception is very old concept. We don't need to talk at length about that, what is perception and what are the factors that shape the perception. But in terms of energy transition perception, it's still emerging, and there are a little bit literature we have collected and gone through. Like we have 5-6 literature on energy transition perception, and I would like to highlight a couple of literature here. One is the study by Michelle Graf in the United States that was in 2021. So that highlights that we need to have place specific an idea and understanding of local values and knowledge and culture that can help measuring the transition, that can help understanding the attitude of local people in perceiving the energy transition, their agreement and disagreement towards the top-down climate change mitigation strategy in terms of shifting to renewables from fossil fuel. And the other one important study is from Lithuania, and that is published by MDP, I think it's sustainability or something, like 2021 published a study. And this says like NEP, that the famous scale developed by Dunlop, that new ecology paradigm, and they say that NEP is not the strong predictor of energy transition perception. So these are a couple of studies and a few more that led us to think about developing some scale or some measure that can at least, if not, can give a generalized perception, and then at least it can give some sense of direction and some initiate some debate in this line, so that we can come up with some verifiable data-driven energy transition perception. So this is how we went about the concept. And for measurement, we built an 8-item Likert scale that these were questions, or these were the statements largely from the coal, from the transition standpoint of view, which gives the hint that we need to replace coal, because these were the areas driven by largely by coal. So so these statements largely capture their perception in terms of whether coal damages the environment or whether government should find an alternative on some items like that. And then we ran our analysis to verify that, validate that scale, and we ideally followed the simple procedure of validating and using the Cronbach alpha score that stood over 0.60, and I think it was 0.67, around 0.71 in case of when we ran the analysis and deleted 3 items which were which helped us to improve the reliability of the scale. And we also ran ANOVA just to make sure that there should be a significant variation within between these items. So finally, we used those 5 items to measure the energy transition perception. We have just shown the sample summary of 1 item that says coal damages the environment, and you can see the frequency of strongly agree people, like 50% of people are in favor of transition policy that should change coal. And so largely we see, if we see the proportion that lies largely below this neutral or disagreement sentiments. So this is how 1 item scoring across overall the 900 sample we have. So likewise, we built that, we summarized the scores from all the 5 items, and we calculated the mean score that also comes around somewhere 2.3 or something. So based on that, we built 2 categories of variable of energy perception that says agreement and disagreement. And then we calculated the, and then we tested the association across some vital variables. So next slide, please, Saakshi. So yes, these are so far we have conducted these, or we have tested these 4 categories. One is employment type, where we tested whether a person is if a person is a worker in a power plant or in a coal mine, and if the worker has 3 types of engagement with that system. We have a permanent worker category, we have a contractual worker, and we have another category who is also contractual, but through a mediator, that is a contracting firm or agency. So across, we ran this association test, and across these 3 categories of nature of employment versus energy transition perception, as you see, disagreement and agreement, and that is some 2 categories, as I mentioned earlier, lying below the mean score of energy perception scale, and 1 above the mean and 1 below the mean. So likewise, we also ran the test across the trade union people. So the people who reported that they are member of a trade union, and the people who are not the member of trade union. So the other test tested that, and the other one, the third one, we also tried to find out whether we have any gender differences, whether male or female perceive this energy transition differently. And in the 4th one, we have a type of unit like coal mine and power plant. So whether people working in coal mine or working in power plant do have any perception differences in terms of replacing coal. So after running all these association tests in the initial phases, we found that only one, that is employment type and energy transition perception, are strongly associated with each other. And the other one, and all the other, we don't find any significant association. So they are just independent. So this is the preliminary finding so far we have. And the next slide, please, Saakshi. And we are planning to conduct further analysis. And the conclusion so far we have is community by and large considers energy transition as a necessity to address climate change. As we saw, the percentage of people reporting agreement towards coal damaging the environment, we have similar sort of alignment of people across other items. Estimation of current and future scenario, we must find out what will be the job loss, as we have captured all these information in our data, and we will be generating reports and more insights from them. And our next job will be to estimate what is the estimated job loss, what is the pandemic impact, and what will be the future scenario for them, like what will be the reskilling process or alternative job prospects from them, from their standpoint of view. And we also plan to develop a vulnerability index based on these factors that includes the effect of migration on them, the effect of closure over the workers, and the other traditional social variables, of course. And the last one is like, we will also seek further policy recommendation that can address to the existing gap that we all have been discussing since long, that we must need some subnational and local level policy that can help engaging and that can help initiate the ground up policy making of energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, now we'd like to welcome the questions and comment from the floor. Okay, I see Konishi-san and Ichihara-san raising their hands. Konishi-san, please.
Very much for a very interesting presentation. I need some time to digest all that information. I would very much like to see your presentation slides, but one very quick clarifying question. You said that Indian Railway is going to decarbonize by 2023, if I got it correct. And I was very surprised to hear that. And can you explain how Indian Railways is closely related to coal? Thank you. Just clarifying questions.
Okay, actually the railways target is to get to net zero by 2023, and already, I'm not sure about this, but 30 to 40% of railways is it already runs on electricity. So whether that electricity comes from coal or it comes from renewable energy, that is a separate matter. But for railways in itself, right, it is approaching net zero by 2023. And coal is important for railways because more or less, I mean, half of coal is transported in India through railways only. And there's so much taxation, there's so much royalties that this coal industry pays, that the price of coal actually doubles when it reaches to the people who use it. So it is one of the most relevant stakeholders in the coal industry. I hope that answers your question.
So basically, the railway is getting a lot of money by transporting coal, and their revenue,
yes,
maybe most or a really big share is coming from coal transportation.
Yes, exactly. 40% of the railways revenue comes from coal only, and they subsidize about 57% of this passenger transport fares from this money.
Oh, I see. So it will cause a lot of problem for the public if they don't get money from coal transportation. Then fare of that railway would be higher.
Yes, that also, and railways is also the biggest employer in India in government sector. So that employment will also get affected, and employment level will go down. The overall economy will go down. So it's everything is connected, and it's a big stakeholder in the coal industry.
Okay, thank you. First, just clarifying question. Thank you. So over to you, to other Masako.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you,
Hira-san.
Masako-san. Thank you. I'm saying Masako. So thank you for interesting question. I'm very curious about your graph you showed in the very last part of your presentation. You differentiate the data source from three parts in the employer kind of employer. If you can kind of share as your slide again. I'm just make clear my question. Could you share your slide again? Thank you so much. Maybe 2 or 3 from the last. I remember there's some graph, four types of graph: employer type and gender, and maybe the slide page 18. Thank you. So I'm very curious why you what hypotheses are there? 2 pages ahead, please. Thank you here. Yeah, thank you. So what do you expect to differentiate this employment type? So permanent worker in company and contract worker in company and employment through. So this difference make some different impact or effect. Maybe your according to your hypothesis, and what do you expect by seeing this conclusion, and what do you think there is some effective policies? So it's very easy to imagine to difference in gender, but employment type, I have no idea. Could you explain more?
Yeah, thanks for this raising this up. Actually, this nature of employment needs an special attention in case of India, because the companies engage workers based on 3 types of terms and conditions. So one, if you see the permanent workers in company, these people are by and large the technocrats. They have engineers, senior engineers, and people to look after HR and finance, and also some sort of technician and some sort of people at the group D level there to provide some sort of services within the plant or within the coal mine. And the other type of employment we have is the contractual worker in the company. So again, they are again directly engaged by the company, that is by the power plant or the coal mine, but they are serving on the contractual basis. They don't have longer term of contractual agreement with the firm or with the power plant and company. The third one is the employment through the contractors. So there are lots of people who are basically wage laborers or people working on the terms of a contractor. And the contractor in terms is engaged with the power plant directly. So what company is doing is that, okay, for the people who are employed through contractors, they're not their headache, they're not their direct responsibility. So although they work in their firms in different operations, whether it is coal unloading, the furnace, or all these divisions, they employ them, but through contractors. So what is happening is the kind of justice question we are trying to address is in that sense, they are more vulnerable. They are the most vulnerable one. And in fact, we have some success, ground stories, not the success stories. A lot of ground stories we have where there are lots of conflict going on between power plant and trade unions, where these people who are employed to contractors were laid off just like that, and without any prior significant notice of a significant time and all. And if you talk of permanent employees, when closure happened due to the so-called environment reasons in 2017, for example, if I discuss about one power plant in Uttar Pradesh, Banki, they transferred their permanent employees to the other power plants, like 2 or 3 other power plants. So they are at the less threat of losing their job, or less, they will be less worstly hit in case the closure happens. So we must take care of these 3 categories of workers, and we must take their opinion, their attitude separately for energy transition. So that's what the idea behind I hypothesize, and we ran this test across these 3 types of category and energy transition. We still have to come up with more insights, but it's all we have like in one day. Like I mentioned on Tuesday, we just finished the data collection and cleaning, entry, and all sorts of. But yes, these ideas we had in our mind to test the association, or the test the importance of the attitude of these people for energy transition, whether they want to welcome the transition or not, and if yes, then on what terms, what they expect. So there are also qualitative information, what these people expect from company. So like these 2-3 things are very clear. Like one, they are expecting this notice period whenever closure happens. And B is, yes, they must be treated equally in. So that's what the motivated us to test this association with these categories of workers and employment type.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I can understand the meaning of the data much clearer. So it's very interesting to see their employment type. So contract worker in company, there is a more percentage in agreement, but conversely, the employment through contractor, their conclusion is diverse. It's very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have about 13 more minutes. And we can accept more questions. Okay, Gregory, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is everything okay? Great. I'm really sorry about the microphone problem in my last question. Very embarrassing. The presentation was fascinating, and I'm always been interested, I think, in social technical lock-in in carbon intensive industries. And we see, like, in different case studies in different regions around the world, different explanations for barriers that prevent, the transition away from fossil fuels. And this case study about the rail sector, and then the influence of, employment, and then also social welfare benefits because of this coal industry is just fascinating for me. But my question is related to the survey, because I understand how difficult it is to design surveys and to produce an interesting story from survey data. So your question basically began with the perceptions of environmental damage, and yeah, I think the question was very simple. It's like, do you think coal is bad for the environment? So I'm just wondering if you could sort of explain, like, the story behind this question. Like, well, why did you choose such a simple question? Because I assume that maybe there's like an assumption that maybe many people in the industry are not aware of the environmental damages, and maybe this is like a barrier to the transition in India. So maybe if you could please explain, like, why you chose this question. And I would also like to know, have a preview about some of the other questions that you considered, because I think it would be a very interesting survey to hear more about the results from. Thank you.
Yeah, Saakshi, can you please, thanks for the question. Saakshi, can you please move the slide up one? So yes, so the first part of question I would like to answer, like why we selected this. So the idea behind selecting this question was because it's very obvious, because from from climate change, international level to all the levels, if we talk about the energy transition, then we find that there are lots of debate on moving from fossil fuel to renewables. And if we factor down the fossil fuel further, we are left with this coal and oil and all these energy sources which are based on fossil fuels. And India, coal is like, you can say, the lifeline of Indian economy. And we have approximately 69 to 70% energy is coming from coal. So, and if not power plants, then coal is definitely at the heart of the energy transition nowadays, if we talk of energy transition research in India. And everybody, you must have heard about, everybody is talking about the, mostly talking about the coal mines in Jharkhand or a nearby state, which has the largest number of coal mines and coal fields. And there are already some sort of policy interventions which are aiming towards reducing coal. So it's like coal is the foremost thing. And if we talk about the community level, then community obviously is not really aware of what is happening at the international level. So when we designed the questionnaire, we had to like go to the community, talk to them, come back, and after like 3-7 interviews, and in total after I think 14, 16 interviews, we could infer that in what language the community is going to understand what we are saying. So that's how we derived this simplistic form of question which they can relate to, like coal damages the environment, as simple as that. Okay, because there are lots of study and community themselves have felt a lot of health problems, a lot of air quality and a lot of pollution. Like this was a common statement from the coal community or the community living in the nearby thermal power plant or coal mine area, that, okay, we have eaten up a lot of coal already. Our lungs are full of that. If you go, so all sort of these statements. So that's why coal was like at the heart. We kept coal at the heart of these scales. So in every item we have almost like, coal is the integral part. So like coal damages the environment, government should find alternative of coal, or so sort of like that. So at the other, in terms of other items, we just made all these constructs that can lead to the sense of whether we have shifted the coal or not. So the perception was basically designed in a way that we put the affirmative statements of changing the coal or moving away from the coal. So all these 5 statements, since was affirmative, so when we calculate the average score, then we could easily infer that, okay, if all these is 5 items is score below 3, which is neutral, 3 is neutral, so below 3, then we would infer that, okay, people are agreeing to the notion that, okay, we need to replace coal because it is damaging the environment or it is damaging our, or government should find an alternative. So all sort of questions. So that's how we constructed that scale, and that's why coal was the kept at the heart of these scales. And yes, that's how we went about it. And about sharing more detail about that, we'll be happy to share. But like I said, we just finished the survey and this couple of days back. So we are yet to share all the scales and items. Once we'll have something in in publication in terms of report or a paper, we'll be happy sharing all these scales and the idea and stories behind that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes, Professor Hasegawa.
Yeah. I'm also very interested in this result. Your questionnaire survey, energy transition perception, especially as Greg referred, about 80% of people are negative to the coal. Yeah, the coal will bring damage to the environment. Dr. Konishi, do you have such a counter data in Japan. Unfortunately, I'm not sure, but in my personal impression in Japan, yeah, people are concerning about the negative effect of nuclear power plant, especially since 2011 Fukushima nuclear accident. But how about coal? In my personal impression, majority of people are not interested in the negative effect of coal power plant. Yeah. How do you think about Dr. Konishi?
Thank you. I was also very much interested in this survey, and I was wondering what the mother data was for doing the research of having 80% of people are, at least disagree with the coal. And as far as I know, I don't think there is a national survey in Japan which asks about how do you feel about coal. So as Dr. Hasegawa has said, that there is a lot of survey asking about the nuclear, but not coal. So I think it's only the local survey that I have seen that asking the coal power plants area, how the community people feel about having coal power plants in their area. But other than that, I don't know. And I'm, as you say, in my, I think, impression, I also feel a lot, majority people are not much interested and have not strong opinion on coal in Japan. So I really was surprised to see this 80%.
Yeah.
So I also want to ask what the mother data of this survey is.
Mudit.
Okay, yes, like I mentioned, maybe one slide back, we have that picture. Can you, Saakshi, move the slide back to the picture? Yes, that was a very valid question. Like if we come up with such results, then from where the survey was taken, what was the kind of population we covered? So as I mentioned in the beginning, we selected 2 states. One is Uttar Pradesh, which houses the country's largest population in India, and it has only coal mine, which has approximately, I think overall like over 3,000 or 4,000 people, depending upon this economy of coal field that is driven by coal field and a power plant. It has a cluster of coal mines and power plant. If you see the lower left portion, we have like 3 coal mines and 1 power plant. And other than that, we also have 2 other power plants and a couple of other coal mine projects, all owned by state and 1 by a couple of 2 owned by private power plants. So this is a huge significant cluster that defines this survey from Uttar Pradesh. And the other, these sample also have data points from 2 other places from Uttar Pradesh that is not shown here in this map. One was from, and both was from standalone power plants operating, one in Obra, which is from the Sonbhat district, same district itself. And one is very near to our own Indian Institute of Technology in Panki power plant. And both are very old power plants in themselves, like operating over 25 and 30 years. And they have seen multiple closures, impacts, and also the good stories of production and giving power to economy. So I think this, the population itself is a highly diverse and representative in terms of a closure, having the impact of closure and non-closure and all. And then on the other side, we selected West Bengal, which is also, I think, if not first, then it ranks among top 3 states of India in terms of coal mines, owning coal mines. So and also we have a couple of power plants from West Bengal as well, which are also pretty old and have seen multiple closures. So if we talk of closures, the entire country, I think these two states have gone through multiple closures, partial closures, not fully closed, but partial closed. But here in Uttar Pradesh, we have one power plant which was fully closed, and they are operating at bare minimum capacity. And I think there were layoff approximately of 800 workers from the Punky power plant alone. So that's how this, the origin of this sample or the mother of this survey. So we have selected opinion of people who have been depending upon coal since their generations. They have been working there since 1990 or 1985. And the people who also have struggled with the firm, and they are in the legal battle with the companies to secure their, the compensation and all that. We also have people who are currently working there, and the local residents who are also currently depending upon there. So the sample comes from the diverse set of population respondents, and they're all interviewed. So all interviewed by our team directly. Yeah.
Sorry. I wish we could continue our discussion, but I think the time is up, and we have to move on to the next presentation. But thank you very much, both of you. It was very, very interesting presentation. Thank you very much.
Everyone for comments and feedback.
Yeah, thank you. All right, the next speaker is Takashi Nakazawa from Toyo University. And his title of the presentation is Diffusion of Net Zero Carbon Declaration Across Japanese Local Government. Okay, Nakazawa-san, please.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. And it's been long today, so I know we all tired, but please be patient a little bit longer and let me take some time. Well, I'm Takashi Nakazawa from Toyo University, and I've been looking into local conflicts over facilities such as waste disposal facilities and nuclear energy infrastructures. But today, I'd like to talk about net zero declarations spreading among Japanese local governments. Well, net zero declaration is a declaration to eliminate all in-boundary GHG emissions by 2050 in accord with the globally shared 1.5-degree target under the Paris Agreement. And these net zero declarations have spread across local government in Japan recently. Well, this graph shows the diffusion of net zero declarations by month. The bar graph shows the number of declarations by month, and the red line graph indicates the cumulative portion. The very first net zero declaration was made by Yamanashi Prefecture in March 2009. However, the diffusion of this declaration began with the declaration by Kyoto City in May 2019, followed by Tokyo Metropolitan Government and Yokohama City. And there were calls or requests from the national government at the end of 2019. Prior to COP25, held in November 2019, the Minister of the Environment called on some local governments to show the list of carbon neutral cities as a symbol of Japan's ambitious decarbonization efforts at the conference. Furthermore, in December of the same year, the Ministry of the Environment sent a request or an email to local government to encourage net zero declaration. And the national government made its declaration on October 26th of 2020. Before this national declaration, 164 local governments made a declaration. And during the following 6 months after the national declaration, adoption of the net zero target peaks with more than 200 new declarants appearing. And on April 22nd, 2021, the Japanese government raised its GHG reduction target for 2030 to 46%. And today, as of the end of February 2022, nearly 600 local governments made a declaration, which accounts for 33.4% of the local governments in Japan. So why this declaration is important? You might say it's just a political gesture and nothing more, but I think it's important because the spread of declarations by local governments collectively provided an environment in which the national governments decided to make its own declaration and raise the midterm reduction target. And more importantly, it indicates a paradigm shift in policy making in domestic climate governance towards backcasting style approaches. Conventionally, Japan lacked ambitious climate target until now, emphasizing on feasibility for industry, roughly speaking. However, the adoption of net zero emission targets for 2050 at both the national and subnational level marks a shift toward backcasting style approaches, well, in a sense, breaking away from the bureaucratic culture of incrementalism. So, how and why net zero declarations have spread across Japanese local governments? What drove the spread of net zero declaration? And how do the causes differ depending on the timing of the declaration? And what prevents a local government from declaring net zero emissions goal? We are looking into these points with a case study conducted in Kanagawa Prefecture. Well, Kanagawa Prefecture is located south of Tokyo and has a population of over 9 million and one of the largest industrial areas in Japan. In the prefecture, there are 34 local governments, including Kanagawa Prefectural government. And this is the overview of net zero declarations in Kanagawa Prefecture. The first city which declared net zero emissions was Yokohama City. That was in June 2019. This is one of the earliest in Japan. And after that, Odawara City and Kanagawa Prefecture made a declaration before the Ministry of the Environment called for declaration from the local governments. Then Kamakura City, Kawasaki City, Sagamihara City, and other two cities followed. In total, 8 municipalities declared before the national declaration in October 2020. And as of the end of February 2022, 20 out of 34 local governments announced net zero emissions declarations, which account for nearly 60% of the local governments in this prefecture. So we conducted case studies for 9 cities and Kanagawa Prefectural government. These 9 cities are kind of big cities with a population of more than 200,000, and they are legally obligated to formulate plans to cope with climate change. And they cover a variety of local governments in the timing of the declaration and whether or not the declaration is made. Here, I divide our cases into 4 categories. The first is top runners, which declared at the earliest period in Japan. In our case, Yokohama City. And the next is early adopters, which declared before the declaration by the national government. In our cases, Odawara City, Kanagawa Prefectural government, Kawasaki City, and Sagamihara City are included in this category. And we have late adopters, municipalities that declared after the national government. Yokosuka City, Atsugi City, and Chigasaki City are included in this category. And finally, we have non-declarants, which have not yet declared as of the end of February 2022. Well, in our case, we have Hiratsuka City and Yamato City. And we conducted a document survey and a semi-structured interview with officials from the 10 local governments. So let's move on to the result. What drove the spread net zero emission declarations in Kanagawa Prefecture? First, we are going to look into Yokohama City as a national top runner. Yokohama City is Japan's largest municipality with a population of over 3.9 million. And it is selected as an environmental future city and an SDGs future city. According to the city officials, the city decided to decarbonize in response to the Paris Agreement and the IPCC report in 2018. Well, Yokohama City has been keeping a close eye on global trends and made a declaration in a sense as a strategy as a global city. Yokohama City has joined international intra-city networks such as the C40 and CNCA. And through these networks and various international conferences, the city keeps abreast of global trends, shares knowledge of solutions, and disseminates Yokohama's initiatives. Also, the city had a close attention on trends in EU cities such as Paris and Frankfurt, which had already declared zero emissions before the Yokohama City's declaration. And the city made a declaration. It's kind of a strategy as a global city. According to the statement of the mayor back then at the city council meeting, she explained why the city made a declaration. She said, it is necessary for Yokohama City as an environmentally advanced city to take proactive measures to combat global warming ahead of other cities. And it can accelerate innovation in the industrial structures and lifestyles by sharing challenges with citizens and businesses. And also, she said, it can attract global companies and global investment as decarbonization is becoming the global standard. This is how and why Yokohama City made a declaration. The next is early adopters, Odawara City, Kanagawa Prefecture, Kawasaki City, and Sagamihara City. Well, one of the features of local governments which made a declaration at the earlier stage, well, including Yokohama City, is that they are advanced cities, in a sense, in environmental policies. Actually, 6 out of the 8 local governments that declared prior to the national government are selected as SDGs future cities. Well, this is a kind of program run by the national government to recognize and support outstanding initiatives towards realization of SDGs, which suggests that local governments with proactive environmental policies made declarations at the early stage. For example, Odawara City made a declaration to promote its energy projects. The city is famous for its progressive energy policies and projects, and have focused on promoting regional energy self-sufficiency, such as renewable energy, local energy supply system, and virtual power plant. When Odawara City made a declaration, the city was preparing to deploy a decarbonized regional transportation model funded by the Ministry of the Environment. So according to the city officials, the city, in a sense, made use of this declaration to communicate the value of this initiative with their citizens and industry. And another interesting feature of declarations in this period is that there is a strong influence of typhoon damage in 2019. In September and October 2019, powerful typhoons hit Japan and caused significant damage in many areas. In particular, typhoon number 19, Hagibis, caused extensive damage in Kanagawa Prefecture, including 9 people dead or missing. So, Kanagawa Prefecture, Kawasaki City, and Sagamihara City which declared zero emissions before the national government took the typhoon damage in 2019 as a direct opportunity to declare. So they made a declaration as a response to the typhoon damage in 2019 to promote their disaster prevention measures. And we have late adopters, Yokosuka City, Atsugi City, and Chigasaki City. Well, different from the local governments which declared at the earlier period, municipalities that have declared after the national government have been greatly affected by the national declaration and declared while keeping a close eye on trends in other municipalities. In other words, they made a declaration because the national government and other municipalities declared. Well, typical example is Chigasaki City. According to the city official, they had a recognition before the national declaration that the net zero declaration was something environmentally conscious and advanced municipalities should do, such as Yokohama City. However, such a recognition changed by the national government's declaration in October 2020. Well, immediately after the national declaration, municipalities in the prefecture surveyed each other's status on declaration, and it was found that many of them are preparing to make a declaration. Furthermore, one of the neighboring city, Fujisawa City, which collaborated with Chigasaki City in various administrative projects, declared in February 2021. So that was when the Chigasaki City decided to make a declaration. Also, there were influence of the national code and the declaration by other municipalities as for Atsugi City and Yokohama City. Well, in local councils of both cities, there were calls and requests for the declaration referring to the national government codes and the fact that many municipalities have already declared. At the same time, despite these vertical and horizontal pressures, these two cities kind of hesitated to declare. So what made them hesitate to declare? For Atsugi City, it is doubt on feasibility of achieving net zero emission by 2050. According to the official, the city administration hesitated to make a declaration because of the difficulty to show a concrete roadmap to their citizens. However, after the exchange of opinions with the citizens, the city changed its mind and decided to make a declaration. And regarding Yokosuka City, it was construction of a new coal-fired power plant in the city, which prevented the city from making a declaration. In Yokosuka City, an ultra supercritical pressure coal-fired power plant was under construction by a company named JERA. And there have been opposition movements, and a lawsuit against the national government regarding the project is underway. So it is true that emissions from energy conversion sector are not counted for the district's emissions, but the presence of a new coal-fired power plant under construction cannot be ignored, making it difficult for the city to explain their net zero emission policy to the public. So it was not until JERA, as a power company, presented a decarbonization roadmap by 2050 at the same time as the national declaration, that the city decided to make a net zero declaration. And the last is non-declarants, Hirasuka City and Yamato City. Well, simply speaking, it's doubt on feasibility again. Municipalities that have not yet declared are very cautious and questioning the effectiveness and the practicality of achieving net zero emissions by 2050. According to city officials, they had a recognition that it is easy to make a declaration, but it needs to be supported and accompanied with a concrete roadmap, and that net zero emissions are impossible without technological innovation and structural changes of industry, which they can't do anything for. Okay, let me summarize the points so far. Well, from the case studies in Kanagawa Prefecture, we found that there were different causes of declaration at different time periods. First, local governments which declared at the early stage, such as top runners and early adopters, are kind of advanced cities in terms of environmental policy. But there is difference between them. Yokohama City, one of the top national top runners, had paid a closer attention to global trends through international intra-city networks and made a declaration as a strategy to increase the city's global presence. On the other hand, as for early adopters in Kanagawa Prefecture, it was the typhoon damage in 2019 which prompted them to make a declaration. These municipalities and prefectural government made a declaration as a response to the typhoon damage. So extreme climate events such as typhoon disaster can be a motive to make a declaration. And in contrast to top runners and early adopters, late adopters were greatly influenced by the national calls and the national declaration, as well as declarations by other local governments. And we found that non-declarants have not declared mainly due to the doubt on feasibility of achieving net zero emissions by 2050, which suggests that municipalities that value setting realistic targets in a conventional incremental manner tend to be more reluctant to take backcasting style approaches such as net zero declaration. Well, it should be noted here, however, these non-declarants have begun to consider making such a declaration given the national declaration and national announcement of 46% reduction target by 2030. Okay, well, today we had a look into net zero declaration by Japanese local governments. Well, you might say net zero declaration itself is merely an abstract statement of a long-term goal, and I agree with that. However, it is also true that many of the declared municipalities and local governments in Kanagawa Prefecture raised the midterm target after their declarations. Of course, it is not clear if it is the direct result of their declarations. Most likely, the national declaration and the announcement of 46% reduction target might have a more direct impact on them. Well, on the other hand, it can be said, hypothetically, that the spread of net zero declarations by local governments supported the changes in national policy. Local governments, such as Yokohama City, which is very sensitive to global trends, declared zero emission first. Then followed by an increase in the number of local governments declaring zero emissions due to caused by the national government partly, and the typhoon damage, which then encouraged other municipalities and the national government to declare, leading to the further increase of declarations by local governments. This chain of vertical and horizontal influences led to the raising of the national midterm target, which in turn led to the raising of the midterm target by local governments, while putting more pressures on non-declarants. So this is how net zero declaration, a backcasting style approach, spread and changed climate policy in Japan. Well, this is just a hypothesis and we need to study further, but this is the tentative conclusion for today. Okay, that's all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nozawa-san. All right. So I would like to welcome questions from the floor. Rajshri-san.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for Nakazawa Sensei. I have one question. You said that not still declaring a group. There seems a very tough doubt of feasibility. But at a glance, it may seem that the top runner will be hesitant to facing the doubt of feasibility. So what do you suppose why they remain in why they still remain such a doubt? Do you have some idea, like geographical reason or some people's some character, local character or something?
Yes, thank you for your question. And well, I don't have so much enough information to your answer directly, but from our case study in, for example, sorry, I'm going to share the slide again. Well, Yamato City is one of the non-declarants. And I asked, why, Yamato City as a city has not declared yet. And the answer is that, well, sort of, because Yamato City is, center of, how to say, logistics, transportation around the, metropolitan area, and energy in this district, of course, supplied by Tokyo Metro, TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company. So the official said it is very difficult for them to do something to reduce emissions in their districts. So automobile, industry and the energy industry, they have to change to reduce the, emissions in their district. So that's why they feel hesitation to make a declaration. And on the other hand, well, I'm not too sure why, this, for example, Yokohama City or Odawara, Kanagawa Prefecture and other, early adopters decided to declare. They were not confident in the feasibility as well, actually. But it's a kind of, their manifestation, showing their manifestation as, environmentally advanced local governments. So actually, all the local governments are not confident in, in the feasibility of net zero emission by 2050, I think, but still they have their own reasons to make a declaration. And as for, such as non-declarant, like Hiratsuka City and Yamato City, they don't have such reasons to make a declaration. Maybe this partly can explain and answer to your question.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, any other questions? We have about 10 minutes. Ichikawa-san, do you still?
Sorry. If there's no any other question,
Yes.
can I add it in the question? So, according to your answer, the declaration can be categorized in two. So, a strong belief in feasibility, but in other case, just a manifestation. Which one is preferable to according to your viewpoint?
You're asking that
so
there's two types of local
yeah.
governments. One is kind of confident in achieving net zero emissions by 2050, and the other is kind of dubious about that, as a feasibility.
Yeah, maybe just to state a manifestation, it also have some significance. But if we are very cautious about feasibility, it's very difficult or hard with raising. But it can be possibly a viewpoint to only manifestation is also okay. Much better than say nothing. So which do you what's your standpoint?
Of course, well, it's kind of backcasting approach. So of course feasibility matters, but still it's just a manifestation, but it matters. It's very difficult to achieve as a goal or target, but still it's significant to set such kind of goal. So from that goal, it's the ideal, and from that goal we can come up with some measures or ways to achieve that goal somehow. Yes, that's the backcasting approach. So in that sense, yeah, it has some kind of significance in policy making, as in climate policy in Japan. But as Dr. Konishi told in her presentation earlier, maybe it's just out of it. Yes, and without concrete measures and ways, it's just meaningless actually.
Okay, thank you. I have a much more clear idea. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. All right, any other questions and comments? Okay, is that Gregory?
Thanks very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, great. Yes, Nakazawa-san, amazing presentation. Wow. So yes, very impressive. And I think you did a great job at explaining this to the audience that maybe doesn't know much about the situation in Japan. So yeah, working with you in this first paper, I guess I was always interested in maybe the next step of this research. And now that you've done your interviews, you've looked at some documents, you've written the paper, you've given this presentation today, what sort of are the next sort of follow-up research questions you think that are important for this this topic that you've looked at sort of the earlier? We just looked basically at the adoption of a declaration, but yes. I think there must be sort of some interesting points to follow up here, like
yes.
How does this sort of affect their existing policies?
Yes.
How are they going to achieve this? But your expertise, I think, is in network analysis, quantitative analysis, and policy diffusion. So from your perspective, what do you think some good maybe follow-up research questions or approaches might be?
Well, as already you told, I'd like to do more research on how that kind of declarations can affect their climate policy, actually speaking, in actual terms. And I already said that this vertical influence and horizontal influence, but we don't have enough evidence to show how the increase of the declaration by the local government affected the policy, national policy, and leading to national declaration in October 2020 and the announcement of 46% reduction target in April 2021. This link is still kind of missing, or we just have weak evidence. So maybe the next step is collecting data, maybe from the document and the interviews, to prove this point. This is one way to further this study. And another is, of course, as you said, and I already told, how this kind of symbolic declaration will affect the climate policy of local governments. That's another point that we have to make, actually soon. These kind of things are maybe our next step.
Great. Thank you very much. Very
Thank you
interesting.
for your question.
Thank you. And I saw one more hand raised, but was it okay? Nozawa-san?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Please.
Thank you for your very interesting question. I have one question about the difference between top runners and late adopters, because sometimes I work with a local government person where my university located, Kokubunzu city, and the Kokubunzu city did a declaration last month, and I feel the local government staff sometimes have little knowledge about climate change and climate policy. So my question is, top runner like Yokohama City, the city has a lot of a lot of staffs with expert knowledge about climate change. I'm not sure, but they have. But on the other hand, the Yamato city or other cities have not so many expert person like Yokohama City. I think this is one reason why they do not or did declaration later. How do you think about this point?
Yeah, thank you for your comment. And yes, you're right, actually. And we did kind of, quantitative analysis as well, mainly conducted by, SATOH-san, actually. And that demonstrated that, municipalities or local governments with more resources, human resources and budget declared earlier at the earlier stages. And municipalities with less resources declared, at the later stage. So this is, one difference between, early adopters, including top runners, and late adopters or laggards. So another thing which distinguishes top runners from the other, early adopters is, international network. Yokohama City is kind of, joined and, in international intra-city networks such as 440 and such. So this connection kind of make the city more, attentive to global trends. So this is maybe, one reason which distinguish top runners from the other early adopters. The human resource or other, budgetary resources and, connection with the international networks.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Very much. I get Professor Hasegawa.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Nakazawa. Very clear-cut presentation. And regarding his presentation, I would like to ask to Pradip and his colleagues. Recently, local initiatives, especially non-national government actors' role are very critical. The best example, we are still movement in the US under the Trump administration. So, net zero carbon declarations by Japanese local governments. This is very interesting and exciting phenomena, I think. And how about in India? in India, some local governments already declare such net zero carbon declarations. Like, how about Delhi, Mumbai, and your city, Kanpur?
Okay, thank you. Keiko, may I answer?
Yes, please. Anyone from the Indian team?
Thank you, Professor Hasegawa, for this question. In the subnational level, particularly in net zero and also the climate policy, we have a state action plan for climate change, like we have national action plan for climate change, but not for all the states. So this is happening for the last 10, 12 years, some action plan for climate change. In terms of net zero, not yet kind of cases even in terms of city, but I can say in the last week, Mumbai, as you mentioned, they came up with a climate action plan and some targets about net zero, and maybe they are the beginners in like developing a proper policy plan for near future. So I think the other metropolitan cities will come up with their plans, net zero plans, or at least certain plans, including how to use automobiles and power sector and all these electricity things. But Mumbai has started with the present Maharashtra. Maharashtra is the name of the state, and the Mumbai is the capital city of, and this is the business capital of India. And they have come up with some climate action plan. So yeah, this is the quick answer because I think we are running out of time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, in fact, we have passed the 16:45, 2 minutes late, but we have been so far exactly on time. Thank you very much for cooperation from everybody. Now I would like to invite Professor Pradip SWARNAKER for the closing remark. Please.
Thank you. So I'd like to start my closing remarks with a vote of thanks to various important persons in this meeting, particularly start with Professor Hasegawa. We have like this project. We are doing, I mean, we are trying to do a collaborative project for last 4 to 5 years. And I hope that we will continue our discussion and comparative study also in future and search for more funding that we'll discuss tomorrow in our business meeting maybe. But nonetheless, thank you for hosting this wonderful and very exciting conferences, a lot of discussion, and the format is also very good, like 20 minutes presentation and 20 minutes discussion. So a lot of room for discussion, and we have understood each other country cases and also some kind of some cultural barriers or some technological barriers, social lock-ins, and which is actually different for different countries. And then I'd like to thank our chair today, Professor Keiko. Thank you for very nicely organizing and timely managing all the presentation, and we have a very fantastic discussion. Then I'd like to thank the speakers, Masako, fantastic presentation, and how kind of non-state actors like WWF is closely, and that is also coming to the Keiichi's paper, that closely working with the government, and this can be one of actually the success story model for other countries where maybe not very involvement of non-state actors. So thank you, Dr. Masako Konishi. And then I'd like to thank my friend Keiichi for presenting the paper, wonderful paper, and hope someday that paper will be published. But this is kind of our long-standing work. We are working on this paper for last couple of years with Greg and Keiichi, and also Avinash, who contributed a lot in this paper, who is, I think, here in the meeting. So thank you, Dr. Sato, for presenting our work today. And then I'd like to thank Dr. Takashi Nakazawa for this detailed case from Japan. And this gives a clear-cut understanding how the Japanese local government, because we are also trying to focus some work on because justice should come from the local level. It should not come from the top down. So this is a very interesting bottom-up kind of a case with a lot of interesting data. And I am just looking forward to read more or listen to more for this kind of study. And thank you, Dr. Nakazawa. And also like to thank our team members, Rajshri Shukla for presenting this discourse analysis, and particularly to Dr. Chauhan and Dr. Singh for presenting our very early findings and the background of our just transition work away from coal. And I hope in next few months we'll come up with a report, or maybe some within a year with a couple of papers, so that the people should know that how this is happening, because not much work has been done in this area. Thank you, Dr. Chauhan and Dr. Singh. See, Atoshi is there, and Greg is like fantastic kind of collaborator to us, and he suggested a lot of things many times. And all the other participants here from India and from Japan and from other countries. So I think finally I'd like to say that we should continue doing this kind of workshop online and offline, and someday we should visit Japan and meet you and those things with more stakeholders.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm just putting my reaction button. And lastly, but not the least, little housekeeping. Thank you very much for all of you for wonderful presentation and exciting discussions. And thanks for the cooperation, and we will keep our conversation for the future. Thank you very much. And can I give the floor to Professor Hasegawa?
Business meeting, yeah.
Yeah. Business meeting.
Yeah, thank you very much, all of you. Yeah, I'm very, very happy. Today's symposium was very successful. Yeah, yeah.